On March 5, 2021, 30-year-old Matthew Dunmire left a suburban Cleveland bar and got into a white smart car driven by a woman he referred to only as an old friend. He told his group of friends that he planned to spend the weekend with her and then vanished. He never returned home the next day, ignored all calls, and his phone was found turned off. No one close to Matthew knew who this woman was, where they were headed, or why he had kept the meeting a secret. What began as a missing persons search quickly turned into a murder case. Matthew Dunmire was born on November 26, 1989, in Hudson, Ohio, to Tommy Lynn Dunmire and John Nelson McQuillan. His hometown was the picture of suburban America: well-kept homes, good schools, and a strong sense of safety. He grew up in that calm environment. From an early age, Matthew was drawn to music. His parents supported him. He started playing guitar at 6 and later learned other instruments. As a teen, he got into rock music and went to concerts with friends from elementary school. Academics weren't his strong suit. In high school, he did just enough to pass, showing little interest in schoolwork. After graduation, he chose not to go to college. Instead, he took a sales job at a local shop and stayed in town. At 20, he met a woman. A year later, they moved in together. Soon after, their son and daughter were born. Though he became a young father, those who knew him say he was a hands-on parent and a family man. He held a steady job, stayed in touch with friends, and lived an outwardly stable life. Chelsea Perkins was born the same year as Matthew and graduated from the same high school in 2009, though they weren't classmates. After earning her diploma, she joined the U.S. Coast Guard. She spent several years serving in Texas aboard a small vessel. During that time, she met her future husband. They later married and had 2 children before relocating to Virginia. After leaving military service, Chelsea began working online, creating adult content under the alias Selena Savage. She opened an account on OnlyFans and promoted it via Instagram. This work brought her a steady income comparable to what she earned in the Coast Guard. All her content was posted under her stage name, helping her maintain a boundary between her public persona and her private life. Both Matthew and Chelsea seemed to have stable lives, and their families and friends were unaware they even knew each other. Before 2021, there was no indication of a connection. Their relationship began with seemingly innocent social media messages that didn't raise any red flags. Nobody expected this online interaction to end so tragically. Friday, March 5, 2021, after work, Matthew headed to Tiki Underground, a bar he often visited with coworkers and longtime friends. That evening was no different. He had arranged to meet a few people for their usual catch-up over drinks. They started gathering around 5:30 p.m., planning to keep it short, as everyone expected to be home by dinner. As the group chatted, they talked about weekend plans. Some suggested a quick trip outdoors. Others mentioned errands or family time. When it was Matthew's turn, he said he was unavailable. He told them an old friend from Virginia had come into town and they planned to meet up and hang out. That immediately sparked curiosity. A few people started asking who this woman was, how they knew each other, and why he hadn't invited her to join them at the bar. Matthew dodged the questions. He didn't mention her name or share any details. All he said was that they were going to stay at an Airbnb outside the city and go for a walk in the park the next day. The reaction among his friends was quietly uneasy. Many were surprised he was heading out overnight with someone no one had ever heard of, especially since he was in a relationship and living with the mother of his children. Several of those at the table had known him since school and couldn't recall him ever mentioning any friend from Virginia. His behavior didn't seem like him. Usually, he was open about his plans and personal life. At one point, Matthew received a message on his phone. He read it, stood up, and said his ride was about to arrive. One of his coworkers, who happened to be his direct supervisor, offered to walk him to the parking lot. He later admitted he was just curious and wanted to see this mysterious companion. By then, it was already dark. Matthew approached a white car parked a short distance from the entrance. From the shape, it looked like a smart car. A dark-haired woman was in the driver's seat. Because of the lighting and distance, her face wasn't clearly visible. The supervisor said goodbye to Matthew and went back inside, telling the others what he'd seen. Matthew's exit left the group with an odd feeling. The conversation continued, but the mood had shifted. Some started speculating about a possible affair. Others were simply puzzled by the secrecy. None of them imagined they were seeing him for the last time. On the morning of March 6, 2021, Matthew's loved ones weren't initially worried. He had said he would be home that evening. However, as the day went on and he couldn't be reached, concerns grew. His calls went straight to voicemail, and his phone was off. By 8 p.m., his partner started calling his friends. Several friends said they had seen Matthew the night before at Tiki Underground. He left with a woman in a white smart car. No one knew the woman, her name, or where they were going. This secrecy increased the worry. Matthew had clearly kept the details of his meeting private, even from close friends. His partner had tried contacting him every way possible, but received no response. The last message he sent was at 10:49 p.m. the previous night. Since then, his phone was off, and there had been no calls or texts. It had been over 24 hours since he left, and it was unusual for Matthew to disappear without any explanation. Late that night, on March 6th, Matthew's parents went to the police station and reported him missing. His mother insisted that he wouldn't have left on his own. She said it was completely out of character for him to disappear without contacting his children or his partner of many years. The family emphasized that he had never done anything like this before. The officers took the report seriously. Although Matthew was legally an adult, the details described raised enough concern for law enforcement to begin a preliminary search. Within hours, they started checking local hospitals, detention centers, nearby hotels, and accident reports. But nothing came up. Without access to Matthew's phone data, investigators had limited tools at their disposal. No one knew where he planned to spend the night. He hadn't mentioned the name or location of the Airbnb. The identity of the woman he met remained unknown. The only lead they had was that she had been driving a white smart car. That information wasn't enough to launch a broader search outside city limits. Efforts to find Matthew have led nowhere. He wasn't at any friend's house, hadn't shown up at work, and wasn't listed among patients at local medical facilities. None of the regional incident reports matched his description. Officers continued questioning relatives and co-workers, hoping to identify any possible travel routes. At the same time, detectives requested footage from nearby security cameras around the bar where he had last been seen. By late evening on March 6th, the situation officially shifted from a temporary absence to a missing person case. Nearly 24 hours had passed since anyone had last heard from Matthew, and there had been no new messages or contact. The case was given high priority. At this point, Matthew's family and friends began to understand that this wasn't just a delay or a personal issue. It could be something much more serious. On the morning of March 9, 2021, the Valley View Police Department received an urgent call reporting the discovery of a man's body by a group of hikers in Cuyahoga Valley National Park. The body was located just off a hiking trail, only a few yards from the path, in an area easily accessible yet concealed from the road by trees and brush. The park, situated on the border of two counties and intersected by several highways, is accessible from multiple directions. Officers arrived on the scene within minutes and quickly secured the area around the body. The man was dressed in dark clothing, including a leather jacket, hooded sweatshirt, fingerless gloves, dark jeans, and boots. A half-full plastic Aquafina water bottle was found nearby on the ground. No identification or phone was found in his pockets. Preliminary examination suggested the individual had been deceased for at least 2 days. There were no signs of a struggle or that the body had been dragged. The undisturbed, supine position suggested the event occurred at that location. A gunshot wound was discovered at the back of the head. The bullet's trajectory, descending from top to bottom, indicated the man was likely sitting when the shot was fired, suggesting the shooter was in close proximity. The body was transported to the morgue for a forensic autopsy, while investigators began reviewing missing person reports from the surrounding area. Upon learning of the discovery, the police traveled to the scene to compare notes. The following day, the coroner identified the deceased as Matthew Dunmire, who had disappeared 4 days prior. His identity was confirmed through fingerprint analysis and a tattoo on his arm, matching the description provided by his family. His loved ones were notified of his death. The official cause of death was determined to be a gunshot wound to the head. With this confirmation, the case was reclassified as a criminal investigation. Now that the victim was identified, detectives focused on their only concrete lead, Matthew's co-worker's statement regarding the white smart car Matthew was seen entering on March 5. One witness, who walked him to the parking lot, recalled that the driver was a dark-haired woman. He could not recall the license plate number and, due to the darkness, had not gotten a clear view of her face. The investigation began with a review of surveillance footage from the area around the bar. While the Tiki Underground parking lot lacked cameras, a nearby traffic camera near the highway exit had recorded a white smart car heading in the direction of Hudson at 5:46 p.m., approximately 15 minutes before Matthew arrived at the bar. This corroborated the car's direction of travel. The next key location on the timeline was a gas station where, at 6:15 p.m., security footage captured the same white smart car. Matthew was seen exiting the vehicle, entering the store, and purchasing a bottle of water, a can of soda, and a pack of cigarettes, the same Aquafina bottle later found near his body. This stop allowed investigators to establish a continuous timeline of the evening's events. Further review of traffic cameras and roadway sensor data revealed the smart car traveled north towards Cleveland. Utilizing toll records and sensor pings, investigators were able to precisely map the vehicle's route. The vehicle arrived at a property rented through Airbnb on Ashbury Avenue, located in the eastern part of Cleveland. Police spoke with the property owner and showed him a photograph of Matthew. He confirmed that Matthew had stayed there for one night. Staff who serviced the home recalled that Matthew had arrived with a dark-haired woman. Following an official request to Airbnb, investigators received the booking information. The reservation had been made under the name Chelsea Perkins. A background check confirmed that Chelsea and Matthew had attended the same high school, though they had not maintained contact in recent years. None of Matthew's family or friends had ever heard of her. He hadn't disclosed to anyone his plans for the weekend. With her identity confirmed, police began gathering details about Chelsea and her current residence. Utilizing surveillance footage, toll booth records, phone GPS logs, and Airbnb registration data, investigators reconstructed a clear timeline of the meeting between Matthew and Chelsea. On March 5, around 6:30 p.m., they arrived at a rented house on Ashbury Avenue in Cleveland. The rental had been booked for one night under Chelsea's name. According to house staff, the two arrived in a white smart car and entered the property together. Nearby surveillance footage confirmed that the vehicle remained parked outside the house throughout the night, and no activity was recorded around the property until morning. At 8:37 a.m. on March 6, both Chelsea's and Matthew's phones began moving. GPS data indicated they had left Cleveland and were heading toward Cuyahoga Valley National Park. By 9:45 a.m., both phones had connected to a cell tower located near the park's southern entrance, which aligned with the previously tracked route captured by traffic cameras. The site where Matthew's body was later discovered was within walking distance of that signal location. GPS data further indicated the vehicle stopped in a nearby parking area, and both phones remained stationary for a period shortly afterward. At 10:49 a.m., Matthew sent a final text to his partner, informing her that he planned to be home later that evening. That message was the last recorded activity from his phone. Roughly 30 minutes later, the signal disappeared, and no further calls or texts were made. The phone was either shut off or switched to airplane mode. Chelsea's device, however, remained active. Forensic analysis of a water bottle found near Matthew's body revealed 2 DNA profiles, his and Chelsea's. This discovery constituted the first concrete evidence placing Chelsea at the scene of the crime. Further forensic testing, including debris found under Matthew's fingernails and hair strands recovered from his clothing, also matched Chelsea Perkins's genetic profile. These results left little doubt that she had been the last person to see him alive. Following the discovery of Matthew's body, police continued to track Chelsea's vehicle. Toll road records logged her white smart car exiting Ohio around 1 p.m. on March 6, heading north. The next confirmed sighting of the car was near Toledo before it crossed into Michigan. That evening, surveillance cameras captured the car pulling into the parking lot of a local tattoo parlor. According to staff at the studio, a dark-haired woman arrived alone, presented an ID bearing the name Chelsea Perkins, and scheduled a service. She remained in the shop for several hours, during which she received a new tattoo. The employees noted no signs of stress or unusual behavior. She paid in cash and left afterward. Later that day, Chelsea posted a photo to her personal Instagram page, standing in front of a mirror at the tattoo parlor. The image showcased the fresh tattoo with a caption that read, "What an amazing weekend." Geolocational data confirmed that the post had been made from within Michigan. There was no mention or indication of what had transpired earlier that morning. On March 7th, surveillance cameras tracked Chelsea's car traveling southeast toward Virginia. She returned to her residence in Arlington and resumed her routine. There were no signs that she felt pressured or was attempting to hide. Over the following weeks, she remained active on social media, sharing everyday posts with no reference to the events in Ohio. On March 30th, 2021, police got a warrant to search Chelsea Perkins's home in Arlington, Virginia. This was more than 3 weeks after Matthew Dunmire died. Investigators had good reason to get the warrant because they had found Chelsea was with Matthew at the park. There was physical evidence connecting her to the scene. They found records of their travel route. They had a shared Airbnb reservation, and surveillance and phone records confirmed their connection. On the day of the search, FBI agents arrived at Chelsea's residence. Chelsea herself answered the door and cooperated without resistance. During her interaction with the federal team, she expressed surprise at their visit and declined to answer any questions without an attorney present. During the search, officers discovered a 9mm semi-automatic handgun, legally registered in Chelsea's name. Forensic testing later confirmed that this weapon was used in the fatal shooting that resulted in Matthew's death. Investigators also seized electronic devices, documents, personal belongings, clothing, and accessories consistent with surveillance footage from Cleveland and the national park. With the combined DNA evidence found on the water bottle and under the victim's fingernails, law enforcement had assembled a solid case. Despite the mounting evidence, Chelsea was not immediately taken into custody. In the months following Matthew's death, she remained in Virginia, maintained a public presence, and showed no visible signs of distress. This inaction by the authorities deeply frustrated Matthew's family. His mother, Tommy, was particularly devastated, unable to accept that the primary suspect in her son's case remained free. In her view, the justice system had failed. Letters and appeals to detectives and the prosecutor yielded no clear response, and neither she nor her husband received a timeline for a possible arrest. Officials cited procedural requirements as the reason for the delay. The ongoing situation took a severe toll on Tommy's mental health. Sleepless nights were spent at her computer, obsessively gathering information about Chelsea. She tracked Chelsea's social media activity, noted addresses, and searched for travel records. This obsession unfolded alongside her intense grief. Over time, that grief hardened into a desperate determination. If the system couldn't deliver justice, she would pursue it herself. In the fall of 2021, Tommy convinced her husband, John, to help with her scheme. They bought 2 UPS uniforms online, rented a car, and created fake delivery packages. Their plan was to pose as delivery drivers to get onto private property. Tommy thought Chelsea lived in Washington, D.C., and that's where they were headed, but she was wrong. Chelsea actually lived in Arlington, Virginia. In November, the Dunmires put their plan into motion. They drove to the address they believed belonged to Chelsea. John waited in a car while Tommy, dressed in a UPS uniform and carrying a package, approached the front door. A woman opened the door, unsuspecting due to the delivery outfit. Tommy then pulled a handgun from under her jacket and fired twice at the woman's midsection. The woman collapsed. Almost immediately, Tommy realized her terrible mistake. The victim had no connection to the case. She didn't know Matthew or Chelsea. Authorities never released her name, but confirmed that she survived after emergency surgery. In a panic, Tommy attempted to flee. Neighbors who heard the gunshots called emergency services. Patrol units arrived within minutes and spotted Tommy walking away not far from the scene. Seeing them, she turned the gun on herself and ended her life with a shot to the head. She was 57 years old. Her husband, John, was arrested at the scene, having remained in a car and made no attempt to escape. He was later charged with being an accessory to attempted murder and conspiracy to commit a criminal act, claiming during questioning that he acted under his wife's pressure and was unable to stop her. The aftermath shattered the family. Matthew's children were now without a father or grandmother. The public outcry increased pressure on investigators, but Chelsea remained free. Tommy never lived to see an arrest. Her tragic decision was seen by many as a devastating consequence of what the family perceived as an unbearable delay in justice. It wasn't until December 9, 2021, 9 months after Matthew's death, that Chelsea Perkins was officially arrested at her registered address. Chelsea remained calm during the arrest and declined to give a statement. She was charged with first-degree murder. The court refused to release Chelsea on bail before her trial. This decision was based on the seriousness of the crime she's accused of, the strong evidence against her, and the possibility she might try to run away. Chelsea was kept in jail while awaiting trial. Her lawyers asked the court to reconsider the bail conditions, but the court stood by its initial decision. Prosecutors presented their case for trial. They provided a detailed indictment with supporting evidence, including witness statements, ballistics analysis, surveillance video, text message logs, Airbnb booking confirmations, and a timeline of Chelsea's digital activity. Between 2022 and 2025, the legal proceedings continued. Chelsea's attorneys maintained her innocence, arguing that the evidence was insufficient. Throughout this time, Chelsea denied any involvement in Matthew's death. Her stance remained unchanged until May 2025, more than 4 years after Matthew's death. She agreed to a plea deal and pleaded guilty to the killing. Under the terms of the agreement, she was offered a sentencing range of 27 to 31 years, with time already served in pretrial detention counting towards the total sentence. The exact length of her incarceration was to be determined later. In exchange, Chelsea provided a statement explaining her actions. According to her, the motive was revenge. She claimed that in 2017, during a party in their hometown, Matthew had committed an act of aggression against her. She reported the incident to local police, but the case went nowhere due to a lack of evidence. The charges were dismissed, and Matthew faced no legal consequences. Chelsea stated that years later, she came across his profile on social media by chance and decided to reach out under the pretense of reconnecting. In reality, she claimed her plan to confront and kill him was already in motion. She explained that she arranged the Airbnb, invited him to meet, and carried out the act, using a tattoo appointment as a cover story. Investigators were unable to verify her claims. Archived records did show a police report filed in 2017 in the same jurisdiction, but the case had been closed within 3 weeks due to insufficient grounds for criminal prosecution. No direct evidence of wrongdoing on Matthew's part was ever established. Matthew's family and friends rejected Chelsea's version of events, firmly believing he was incapable of such behavior. However, prosecutors did not formally challenge her account, as the main person involved was no longer alive to defend himself. The court acknowledged that the guilty plea avoided a lengthy jury trial. Chelsea Perkins faces 20 to 25 years in prison when she is sentenced on September 9, 2025. The motive behind the crime was never confirmed through independent evidence. Chelsea's statement remained the only account of what led to the act. Public opinion remained sharply divided. Some viewed her as someone who sought personal revenge for a past injustice, while others saw the crime as a calculated killing with no substantiated cause. No conclusion fully satisfied both sides. Angel Ormston was born in 1975 in Mentor-on-the-Lake, a quiet suburb of Ohio, USA. This area has about 7,000 residents, and everyone knows each other. Children from local families often get along and grow up together. Life here is very simple and similar. The local high school serves as the main place of learning for most young people in town. Angel is a friendly and cheerful girl. She particularly enjoys walking around the area with her friends and often drives around with loud music. Local teenagers often gathered at a large shopping mall in a nearby, bigger city, which featured restaurants, a movie theater, and various stores. It made sense that Angel would find a part-time job there. In the summer of 1992, she started working at a fast food restaurant as she prepared for her senior year of high school. This job not only allowed her to earn some pocket money but also helped her save up for college. Her daily routine was consistent. She worked in the mornings and spent time with friends afterward. On the evening of July 31, 1992, 17-year-old Angel planned to go to her restaurant to pick up her paycheck and do some shopping. She promised her mother, Jackie, she would be home before the mall closed. Initially, her mother was not concerned and went to bed, assuming she was out with friends. The next morning, she woke up to find Angel missing from her room. Despite this, she didn't worry too much because it was common for her daughter to stay over at friends' houses, especially on weekends and holidays, so she pushed her uneasy thoughts aside. In this close-knit community, crime was rare, and young people often visited each other without worry. However, Angel, a high school student, didn't always keep her mother informed, which led to concerns. Her mother didn't want to restrict Angel too much, allowing her daughter considerable freedom that matched her independent spirit. Angel's upbringing was relaxed. Her mother was adaptable and aimed to maintain a harmonious environment. Meanwhile, her father was often away as a long-distance truck driver. Despite the lack of strict rules or curfews in the Angel household, unsettling thoughts began to creep into Jackie's mind. Angel was missing all Saturday, and when her mother woke up on Sunday to find she still hadn't returned home, worries began to set in. She called families where Angel could stay, and her brother also went to the shopping center where she worked. Upon arriving at the parking lot, Angel's brother noticed her Honda Civic, which heightened his concern. He hoped to find Angel inside but instead found her purse, comb, and other personal items left on the driver's seat, indicating she might have vanished. He checked the burger joint where she worked but learned she hadn't shown up for a couple of days. Alarmed, he contacted Jackie, their mother, who hurried to the shopping center to retrieve Angel's car and uncover the truth while pushing aside her fears. Initially, she hoped it was just a series of coincidences. Angel often went out at night with her best friend, Stacy. That day, Stacy's family could not be reached, which gave Jackie some peace of mind. Nonetheless, anxiety grew as Jackie drove around the mall looking for Angel, but she found no trace of her daughter. Friends who did manage to contact her hadn't seen Angel since Friday. By 8 p.m., Jackie still couldn't reach Angel, deepening her worry. Jackie finally decided to report her daughter Angel as missing by going to the police. Although Angel was last seen on July 31st, Jackie did not visit the station until August 2nd. This delay raised suspicions among the police, but Jackie explained that she believed she needed to wait 48 hours before reporting someone missing. Jackie provided detailed information about Angel, including her life and relationships. Jackie asserted that, up until the very last moment, she was not worried that anything serious had happened to Angel. On the morning of Monday, August 2nd, Jackie managed to reach Stacy, who confirmed Jackie's fears. Stacy had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and hadn't seen Angel. She was shocked to learn that her friend had been missing for over 2 days. Stacy tried to contact some mutual friends, but none had seen Angel. Following this, Jackie provided the police with new information, prompting them to initiate an active search for Angel. The police first examined Angel's car, which showed no signs of a struggle. The car was in normal condition, with no blood, signs of theft, or forced entry. The officers believed Angel may have left the car willingly. Given her age, they suggested she could have run away, but Jackie rejected this idea, citing their good relationship. Angel was not involved with banned substances and had always remained calm during her teenage years. Despite her independent nature, she was not the type to run away. In fact, she had been making future plans, including furthering her education at university. Detectives worked extensively to investigate Angel's disappearance. They suspected she might have been kidnapped from the car and collected many fingerprints at the scene. Although there were numerous prints, all belonged to family and close friends. Despite this, every individual had to be investigated to clear them as suspects since there were no other leads. The investigation began with Angel's father, a truck driver, but he was quickly ruled out because he had a verified alibi. He was in another state when his daughter went missing. Next, detectives looked into Angel's mother, Jackie. Her refusal to take a polygraph test raised significant suspicion and drew the attention of the investigators. They noted her delay in contacting the police and her decision to take Angel's car from the parking lot soon after learning about the disappearance, which further fueled suspicions. The police lacked the authority to compel her to take a polygraph test, and there was no direct evidence against her. As a result, the investigation continued with Jackie being the primary suspect. Jackie claimed that on the evening when Angel left home, she intended to go to a burger place. However, interviews with local staff revealed that Angel never arrived to pick up her paycheck that day. Investigators seized the opportunity to gather more information from Angel's colleagues. They quickly eliminated Jackie from the list of suspects due to Angel's good relationship with her family. However, they developed several other theories, including a suspicious connection to a former manager known for inappropriate behavior toward female employees. Investigators suspected that the former manager had been spying on female staff while they changed into their work uniforms. Later, he was fired for a harassment incident. Several female employees reported that this manager had touched them inappropriately. When the police investigated him, they discovered he had a criminal record for inappropriate behavior with minors, making him the main suspect. Other women also mentioned that he frequently focused on Angel, often looking for chances to be alone with her in the kitchen and making inappropriate comments. When this was discovered, the detectives were so focused on the case that they overlooked Jackie. The former manager was quickly located and interviewed, but he denied any involvement in Angel's disappearance. He said that she hasn't seen him since they worked together. He claimed that, on the day she went missing, he was far from his hometown and provided a timesheet showing that he was at another location of the fast food chain that day. Despite this evidence, detectives did not exclude him as a suspect and continued to question everyone at the restaurant, including both staff and management. Through their investigation, they uncovered a secret that Angel had kept from her family. She had been fired for consistently being late. While she was indeed heading to the restaurant to collect her final paycheck, this revelation did not provide any new leads regarding her disappearance. Gradually, all of Angel's co-workers were ruled out as suspects because they had alibis. Neither Angel's former manager nor her mother was considered a viable suspect in the case, making it difficult for the police to conduct their investigation. Communication with Angel's closest friends did not reveal any new information. Everyone was shocked at the idea that someone in her circle might wish her harm. She was gentle, trusting, and usually avoided conflict. However, her trusting nature made her vulnerable to someone who might manipulate her into a dangerous situation. After a long period without contact, fears grew that Angel had died. She hadn't reached out to anyone, appeared in public, or used any payment methods. Given these circumstances, the police decided to re-examine the people closest to her, as those responsible for such crimes are often found among acquaintances. The focus shifted to her best friend, Stacy. Although they had spoken to her briefly before, this time the interview lasted over 4 hours. From the start, Stacy expressed a strong willingness to help but firmly denied any involvement. She was cleared as a suspect when she provided a confirmed alibi. She had spent the entire weekend at her sister's house and they had been together the whole time, cooking side by side. The police are trying to ask Stacy if she knows about Angel's relationship with a man. Stacy revealed that Angel had recently become interested in a young man named Mark Sotka, a 19-year-old who had just graduated with honors from their high school. Stacy explained that Angel had been in love with Mark for a long time and even hoped to start a serious relationship with him. However, Angel was very private, especially about her relationships, and only Stacy knew about Mark, not even sharing it with her mother. During the questioning, Stacy reveals that Angel was aware of her pregnancy shortly before she disappeared. They had talked several times about the possibility of telling Mark about the baby, and Angel was optimistic that he would accept her and the child, viewing it as the start of their life together. Stacy was doubtful, but Angel was convinced she could build a family with Mark. The detectives decided to investigate Mark's background before confronting him. It appeared that Mark was not ready for fatherhood. Just before Angel went missing, he started college, which suggests he may have only considered Angel a short fling while planning to focus on his studies. They found no incriminating evidence against him, as he had a clean record and a solid reputation in school. Eventually, Mark was called to the police station for questioning. He was surprised to learn that he was considered a suspect in Angel's disappearance. He denied any involvement and refuted Stacy's claims about their relationship. When he learned that Angel might be pregnant, he laughed it off, dismissing it as a fabrication by his girlfriend. He admitted to having had a brief encounter with Angel at the beginning of summer but said they had not met again since then. Additionally, he had been in a relationship with another girl for 2 years. To support his claims, he needed to provide proof and a reliable alibi. Mark testified that he left work at 5 p.m. on July 31, 1992 to go to a shopping mall. He intended to buy a gift for his girlfriend and then meet friends at a pizzeria. The police began to investigate his account closely. His employment at a car dealership was verified through his timesheet, which matched his claimed working hours. Additionally, they found a receipt for the gift purchase. Several friends from work supported his story, confirming he was at the pizzeria until around 9 p.m. The only inconsistency was that some staff members at the places he visited that evening did not remember him. However, Mark willingly took a polygraph test, which showed no evidence of his involvement in any crime. As a result, he was cleared as a suspect. The investigation hit another dead end, prompting detectives to revisit earlier theories of escape or kidnapping. Discovering that Angel might have been pregnant reinforced these theories. Her family may have opposed her having a child at just 17, leading her to potentially run away to start a new life with the baby. Unfortunately, these possibilities did not bring them any closer to finding her. Frustrated by the lack of progress, Angel's mother decided to take action. She reached out to the community through local media in hopes of gathering information. Her appeal successfully raised awareness about Angel's disappearance, turning the incident into a well-known topic of discussion. Friends and concerned individuals joined in, distributing thousands of leaflets. Charities became involved, and a fund was established, raising $10,000 as a reward for anyone who could provide useful information for the investigation. In the following weeks, the police department received numerous requests for information, which opened several new leads for the investigation. Detectives conducted thorough checks, but these efforts did not yield any significant results. Frustrated, Angel's family made the decision to hire a private detective. When Angel's father returned from a trip, he was hopeful that it would help locate his daughter, unlike the ineffective efforts of the police. However, despite the detectives' hard work, no new information emerged. 3 months passed, and there were still no updates on Angel's case. By this time, her friends had almost lost hope, but her mother remained determined. Angel's mother, Jackie, even altered the message on their answering machine, leaving a note for her daughter in the hopes that she would eventually call. She refused to believe that anything bad had happened to Angel. Meanwhile, the entire city was critical of the police for their lack of progress, which led to increased pressure on law enforcement to revisit existing leads and suspects. Eventually, detectives began to focus on a man who was engaged to Angel's best friend. He was very interested in finding out what happened to her and was vocal in his criticism of the investigation. His name was Candle. Even though he showed a strong interest in Angel, he did not give any information to the detectives or the media. It was believed that he had attempted to start a relationship with Angel and was rejected, which might have led to her kidnapping or murder. On the day she went missing, he was working at a shoe store in the shopping mall where she was last seen. He had a confirmed alibi for that time, but after work, he could have committed a crime, especially since he was nearby. He allowed investigators to search his car, but nothing suspicious was found. The investigation had reached another dead end. On December 15, 1992, 4.5 months after Angel's disappearance, a local resident was out hunting with his dog. While walking through the forest, the dog became uneasy and led its owner away. This took them to a drainage ditch, where the hunter noticed something wrapped in a sheet and tied with a rope. Upon closer inspection, he saw a human hand protruding from the package. The man quickly contacted the police. When law enforcement arrived, they discovered a body in an advanced state of decomposition. Identification was possible only through dental records, which confirmed that it was 17-year-old Angel Ormston, who had been reported missing. On December 16, Angel's family was informed of her death. An autopsy showed she had suffered blunt force trauma to the head, which might not have been fatal. However, she had sustained 2 stab wounds to the chest, both delivered with significant force, impacting her heart. As a result, she bled out quickly and died. Investigating her death was complicated by decomposition, but fibers resembling those from a blue carpet were found at the scene. The police compiled a list of all homes associated with Angel, including those of neighbors, family, and friends, in search of a home that might have green carpeting. One key location of interest was the house belonging to Mark, who might have been the father of Angel's unborn child. At the time of the murder, the house was empty as it was for sale. Witnesses claimed they saw Mark enter the house with a girl who matched Angel's description. Although the house had been sold by then, the new owners allowed detectives to inspect it. Most rooms had been renovated, except for the basement. Upon entering the basement, the police found a blue carpet that matched the fibers collected from the scene. Additionally, a clothesline similar to the one used by the killer to move the body was discovered in the laundry room, matching the one found on Angel. The new owners reported that both the carpet and the clothesline had been left behind by the previous owners. These items were sent for forensic analysis, and tests confirmed that the microscopic fibers and the rope matched those used in the crime. Furthermore, a bloody fingerprint was discovered in the basement. 5 months after Angel disappeared, on December 31, 1992, 19-year-old Mark Sotka was arrested on suspicion of murder. During his arrest, he insisted that the police had no evidence against him and claimed he was not the person they were looking for. He immediately refused to cooperate with detectives, prompting forensic experts to conduct a detailed examination of his car. They discovered that although he had attempted to clean the interior, a few small drops of blood remained. During questioning, Mark eventually broke down due to the overwhelming evidence against him. He admitted to committing an act he described as stupid. When pressed for more details, he confessed to murdering Angel. Mark explains that he invited Angel to his house for intimate relations again, but things changed that night when she revealed that she was pregnant and that he was the father. This news triggered a violent outburst from him. He demanded that she get an abortion, but she refused. An argument ensued, during which Angel threatened to cause problems. In a fit of rage, Mark struck her several times in the face. Angel fell in the garage, and Mark, grabbing a knife, returned to the basement and stabbed her twice in the chest. Afterward, he calmly met with his friends at a pizzeria, chatting and laughing as if nothing had happened. Later that evening, he wrapped her body in a sheet, secured it with a clothesline, and transported it in the trunk of his car to a wooded area, where he left it in a ditch. Afterward, Mark returned home, covered up the evidence of the crime, and cleaned his car. After 5 months of investigation, he was arrested as the killer. During questioning, Mark confessed to first-degree murder and led authorities to the location where he disposed of the knife used in the crime. Despite thorough searches, the knife was never found. However, he had limited chances of proving his innocence. The motive for the attack stemmed from Angel's pregnancy, which disrupted his future plans. Mark had no intention of continuing his relationship with her and wanted to focus on someone else. In February 1993, to avoid the death penalty that was in place at the time, Mark officially admitted his guilt. Consequently, he was sentenced to life in prison but became eligible for parole after 30 years. Angel's family pointed out that Mark showed no remorse or compassion, which explained how he was able to deceive the polygraph test. Following his sentencing, he was taken to jail. After serving 20 years, Mark utilized an old Ohio law that allowed him to request a parole hearing after 2/3 of his minimum sentence. His family was informed, and Angel's relatives increased their efforts to prevent him from being released. Their efforts were successful, and he was denied parole in July 2023. After serving 30 years, Mark appeared before the parole board again, but this time, Angel's family opposed his release once again. As a result, he remains in prison. Angel's family expressed their relief to the media, calling it a significant victory for them. Her mother stated that their family would continue to fight to keep the killer incarcerated and would never forgive Mark, who has never expressed remorse or sought forgiveness for taking Angel's life and the life of her baby. Zoe Gabrielle Campos was born in September 1995 in Lubbock, Texas. She was the youngest daughter of her parents, Melinda and Alejandro Campos III. She had an older sister, Savannah. Their father served in the Navy infantry, which caused the family to move frequently, but after a few years, they eventually returned to Lubbock. Melinda and Alejandro eventually divorced. While growing up, Zoe had many different hobbies, but most of all, she loved animals. Zoe's mother said that the girl often brought home stray animals. She has a kind heart, wants to help all animals, especially dogs, cats, and turtles. Zoe was very close to her mother from a young age. Her mother mentioned that people often joked about how Zoe and she had forgotten to cut the umbilical cord. Zoe was an incredible daughter, sister, and friend. She was cheerful, funny, but very caring. Zoe was also interested in mechanics and spent her free time repairing cars. Shortly before her disappearance, she started working on an old car that she hoped to restore herself. Her mother said that if Zoe could open a pet store next to an auto repair shop, she would definitely do it. Zoe had a wonderful relationship with her sister Savannah, and they spent a lot of time together. Savannah had 2 children, and Zoe loved being an aunt. She enjoyed taking her nephew fishing at a lake not far from their home. Despite being only 18 years old, Zoe was very mature and extremely responsible. She didn't go out partying, preferred the silence and cozy atmosphere at home. Unfortunately, all of this was taken away from her. On November 17, 2013, Zoe spent most of the day with her family. Later that evening, she planned to go to her friend April's house, where a baby had just been born, and April invited her closest friends to celebrate the occasion. It was not a big party, but rather a small gathering of friends, and of course, everyone there knew April. However, not all the guests knew each other. It was a normal evening. Everyone was chatting, and a friend mentioned that Zoe left around 9 p.m. because she planned to go to dinner with her sister Savannah. They intended to spend the evening with another friend. Savannah later reported that during dinner, Zoe was as carefree as ever. After dinner, everyone went to watch a movie. When the sisters returned home, Zoe planned to spend the night at Savannah's house to take care of her nephew and niece the next day while Savannah was at work. Savannah stated that the movie ended at 11:30 p.m., and during the film, Zoe seemed to fall asleep. When they got home, Savannah went to her room, thinking that Zoe would sleep on a couch in the living room, unaware that the next morning, her sister would be gone. Zoe left the house later that night when Savannah went to bed, which was out of character for her. It is known that Zoe left home at night from an emergency message her mother received at 2:30 a.m. Melinda worked at a bar that closed around that time, and she was pleasantly surprised when she got a message from her daughter, asking for a ride home. Melinda waited for about 30 minutes, but Zoe never showed up. Initially, Melinda was not too troubled and tried to call her daughter, but Zoe didn't answer. Melinda thought that maybe Zoe had simply fallen asleep. Melinda reached a friend's house near the bar and stayed there overnight, planning to return home in the morning. On November 18th, Zoe's sister woke up and began getting ready for work. Seeing that Zoe was not on the couch and not in the house, Savannah immediately started calling her. When Zoe didn't answer and her car wasn't parked outside, Savannah thought Zoe might have gone home early. She called again, but each time, the call went straight to voicemail. Savannah then contacted her mother and realized that she also couldn't reach Zoe. Panic ensued. Savannah and Melinda started calling hospitals to see if perhaps Zoe had been in an accident. However, after several hours without contact or any information, the women finally reported Zoe's disappearance to the police at around 5 p.m. The police could only accept a missing persons report after 24 hours. Fortunately, they agreed to send out a profile of Zoe's car and attempted to contact her mobile service provider. They were informed that Zoe's phone was either turned off or the battery had been removed. Then, a surprising coincidence occurred. Zoe's aunt, Monica Rivas, was driving through the city on November 20th when she spotted her niece's gray Lincoln car near the university on 62nd Street. Monica immediately followed the car, trying to see the driver, but found it difficult due to the tinted windows and the car's speed. Still, she managed to determine that the driver was a man dressed in a hoodie with a darker complexion, and he appeared to be about 20 years old. As Monica followed the car, a lot of questions raced through her mind. Was Zoe in the car? Had this person harmed her? These thoughts nearly overwhelmed her, so she decided to focus on following the car while calling her son to explain the situation. However, the driver of the pursued car seemed to realize he was being followed and tried to escape. Eventually, Monica lost sight of the car when it turned sharply south, but she persisted in her search. When her son joined her, they found the Lincoln parked near Zoe's apartment. Monica immediately called the police and had to wait about an hour for the officers to arrive. Unfortunately, Zoe was not in the car, and she remained listed as missing. After inspecting the car, the police discovered several items: a phone charger, a black jacket, a sweatshirt, and some duct tape. They collected all of these items as evidence and lifted fingerprints from the vehicle. Since Zoe's father was an active member of the Marine Corps, the Naval Criminal Investigative Service became involved in assisting with the investigation. They took the jacket for forensic examination to look for any traces that could lead them to Zoe. The investigators also needed to find out if anyone had seen her on November 17th from 11:30 p.m. onward. Based on her latest text messages, mobile phone operators helped to estimate her approximate location, which indicated that she had been within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field, a local football field. This area had a reputation for crime and other societal issues, which surprised Zoe's friends and family. Zoe did not use illegal substances and had no involvement in what is known as human trafficking, raising their concerns about the location where she was last seen. The investigators tried to speak with everyone who had been at April's house the night Zoe went missing, hoping someone might have heard or seen something unusual regarding Zoe's behavior or conversations. They discovered that a man named Carlos Rodriguez attended the party. When questioned on November 25th, Carlos claimed he did not know Zoe before they met at April's but mentioned they had conversed briefly. He stated that they left at almost the same time, but the investigators found something odd in his story. Something felt insincere. As a result, Carlos was called in for additional questioning on December 9th. During this session, the investigators received significantly different information. Carlos admitted he had lied earlier, that he and Zoe communicated on Facebook after leaving April's. He said they had agreed to meet at his house that night to chat, but he continued to deny any involvement in Zoe's disappearance. He claimed she had come over, they intended to smoke marijuana, but when they had none, so Zoe left to find some and never returned. Carlos explained his initial deceit was due to not wanting to get in trouble over banned substance. However, he became the primary suspect in the case. Given that he had lied previously, investigators wondered if he was telling the complete truth this time. It turned out that his house was within a 1-mile radius of Lowry Field. In 2014, Zoe's family hired their own investigator to pursue any leads they came across, and they received numerous messages from community members eager to assist in the investigation. The investigators insisted that Carlos knew more than he disclosed. Eventually, they obtained a search warrant and investigated his residence. The police dogs brought and found several traces of Zoe's scent in that house and in the alley. The police conducted thorough searches of the premises but found no additional evidence. Over the course of 2015 and 2016, the entire community aided in the search, spreading awareness by posting flyers featuring photos of Zoe in hopes that someone might remember her or provide clues. As the years passed, Zoe's family and loved ones clung to hope for her safe return. On November 16, 2016, relatives and community members held a candlelight vigil to honor Zoe, who had gone missing 3 years prior. Over the years, investigators continued to seek the truth from Carlos. He was repeatedly called in for questioning, yet each time, his account of meeting Zoe evolved. However, when investigators found DNA on Carlos's jacket, he had to admit that Zoe had been in his house and in his room for some time. That night, Carlos was interrogated at the Lubbock County Detention Center. During investigations into Carlos, it was revealed that he had been stalking his ex-girlfriend, who said Carlos had threatened her with violence on several occasions. At that point, investigators were sure there was more to his story, but they needed concrete evidence before they could request another warrant. Then, another inmate, who was serving time with Carlos, mentioned in a conversation about the search that was being conducted at Carlos's house that, "The police have searched, the body will not be found until the concrete is removed." This statement was later confirmed by an informant who, on July 31, 2018, contacted detectives to tell them that Carlos had confessed to him where he hid Zoe's body. The informant provided specific details from Carlos's words about where the body could be found, which was enough to obtain another search warrant. In November 2018, the same team of police officers, accompanied by service dogs, went to conduct a search in the backyard. The dogs alerted the police, and they began digging in that area. Eventually, they discovered a set of bones. The bones were sent for examination, but before determining whose they were, there was no certainty that they were human remains. Carlos was called in for questioning, and in the middle of the interrogation, when the bones were mentioned, he fell silent, refused to talk until he was granted access to a lawyer. The lab results came quickly, revealing that the bones were not Zoe's, but rather animal bones. Investigators decided not to inform Carlos of this, as his reaction when the bones were mentioned suggested that the investigation was close to solving Zoe's case. In the following days, Carlos was closely watched, as were those he communicated with. After monitoring some of his conversations, investigators realized that Carlos genuinely believed they had found Zoe's remains. On November 14, the police used ground-penetrating radar to identify additional areas to dig. However, before digging commenced, Carlos requested to speak with the lead detective. During this meeting, Carlos gave a full confession. He explained that on the night he and Zoe were together, they decided to use an illegal substance. After taking it, he went crazy, hit Zoe hard in the face, put her in a chokehold, and took her life. Carlos claimed that he buried Zoe that night in his backyard and later relocated her body to a deeper grave. Investigators took Carlos to the residence where he showed them the location of Zoe's remains. Just after 10 p.m. on November 16, 2018, Zoe's decomposed remains were found. Carlos was arrested and charged with her murder. The arrest warrant stated that Carlos Rodriguez confessed to killing Zoe in the house in which he committed the crime early in the morning of November 18, 2013. Zoe's remains were sent for forensic examination. Since much time had passed and the body had decomposed, they had to use dental records to confirm the identity of the remains. Zoe's father explained that when he sat down with relatives and told them that the body belonged to Zoe, everyone felt some relief, knowing that Zoe was not lost or suffering, and while this part of the tragedy was over, the pain remained. Despite Carlos's full admission of guilt, he later maintained in court that he was innocent. He also published a letter intended for the media in which he reiterated his claim of innocence, stating that he and Zoe had met at April's house for the first time, and that they had shared some flirtation. Carlos claimed that when he sent Zoe a message on Facebook late at night, they agreed to talk at his house. He stated that during the conversation, his mind, clouded by the substance, distorted reality, leading him to perceive Zoe as having an evil grin before he struck her. He said he did not remember how he managed to catch up to her, and that he regretted the actions he took, having lived for 5 years with guilt over the murder. Carlos apologized to Zoe's family in his letter, asking them to forgive him and encouraging them not to succumb to hatred. He also claimed he had to bury Zoe's body after it began to be unearthed by dogs. He and his lawyers prepared for trial, arguing that his original confession had been coerced because he had not been represented by a lawyer at the time. However, the judge ruled that both Carlos's oral and written confessions were legally obtained, could be used in court. On August 15, 2022, Carlos changed his plea from not guilty to an open plea, meaning he did not make a deal with prosecutors but planned to use his chances in court. He faced a minimum sentence of 5 years and a maximum of life imprisonment. After a brief deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict on August 18, sentencing Carlos Rodriguez to life imprisonment for the murder of Zoe Campos. The Jacobson family seemed to have it all: wealth, success, and a beautiful home in Wellington, Florida. They appeared to be the ideal loving family. However, appearances can be misleading. Behind the facade of their perfect life lay a much darker reality. What was meant to be a joyful birthday celebration for their 2 young boys turned into a devastating event, leading to a tragedy so profound that the entire nation would remember their names. To fully grasp this story, we need to go back to 1989 when Neil Jacobson met Frankie at a gym in Bayside, Queens, New York, where they both lived and worked. They are ambitious and successful in their careers. Frankie was making her mark at Lehman Brothers, a leading firm in finance, while Neil had established his own boutique firm on Long Island. They were young, driven, and aspiring to achieve the American dream. Those who knew them praised their relationship as one filled with deep admiration and affection. Frankie was entirely devoted to Neil. In turn, he was seen as a charismatic and kind man with immense potential. Within his family and social circles, he was often regarded as a golden boy, intelligent, charming, and seemingly unstoppable. Together, Neil and Frankie appeared to be the perfect couple. They soon took the next step in their relationship by getting married and moving into Neil's home in New Jersey. Transitioning into married life was easy for them. Together, they created a comfortable, rewarding life filled with shared interests and adventures. They did everything, enjoying activities like biking, scuba diving, and weekend trips to the countryside, which helped strengthen their bond. To an outside observer, their life seemed perfect. However, amidst their seemingly ideal marriage, they felt something was missing: children. They desperately wanted to start a family, but the path to parenthood was challenging. For years, they endured the painful reality of infertility, going through multiple fertility treatments that brought both hope and disappointment. Despite the emotional toll, they remained determined. Finally, in 2003, after many struggles, their dreams came true when they welcomed twin boys, Joshua and Eric. With their lives already comfortable, Frankie and Neil experienced happiness beyond what they had ever imagined. Their family felt complete, and they thrived both personally and professionally. Neil's parents, Harold and Goldie Jacobson, moved from New Jersey to Florida in 2000. Although they loved their new home, they missed being close to their son and his family. They often expressed their frustration about the distance and wished for more time with their grandchildren. In 2005, Harold was diagnosed with cancer, and his health deteriorated rapidly, making it impossible for him to travel to New Jersey. This situation was a turning point for Neil. Being far from his father during such a critical time was too much to bear. He decided to move his family to Florida to be closer to his parents. Before the move, Neil had already started investing in real estate in Florida. He bought a pre-construction condo in Lantana and then a second one shortly after. Real estate quickly became an obsession for him, leading to the purchase of a third condo. Despite recognizing that he was stretching himself financially, he was drawn in by the booming market. Frankie, however, was concerned about his investments and questioned their practicality. Nonetheless, Neil was resolute in his decision and was not willing to change his plans. With his properties piling up in Florida, Neil began pushing Frankie to relocate. She was resistant, hesitant to leave behind the life they had built in New Jersey. She loved their home, their community, and the stability they had created. But as time passed, the financial strain of maintaining their New Jersey home became overwhelming. Eventually, Frankie reluctantly agreed to the move. The Jacobsons officially settled in Florida, eager to start a new chapter close to family. However, things did not go as planned. Neil had hoped to sell their New Jersey home before the move, but the market wasn't in his favor. Just 2 months after they arrived in Florida, tragedy struck. Harold Jacobson passed away. The loss of his father devastated Neil in ways he hadn't expected. He had uprooted his entire life to be closer to Harold, only to lose him so soon after arriving. The grief weighed heavily on him, and his mother, Goldie, later revealed that Neil had struggled with his mental health from a young age. She recalled that as a teenager, he had been diagnosed with obsessive-compulsive disorder, an issue that had plagued him for years. Doctors had noted that Neil had an overwhelming desire to be the perfect child, a pressure that followed him into adulthood. As the years passed, his struggles with anxiety only grew, and soon, things took an even darker turn. The Great Recession hit Florida hard, and Neil, who worked as a mortgage broker. The real estate market collapsed, and the once thriving business that had allowed him to invest so freely was now crumbling beneath him. The financial security he had worked so hard to build was slipping away. As the weight of his losses grew heavier, so did the cracks in his once stable world. The Florida condos he had invested in before relocating were quickly turning into a financial nightmare. Burdened with subprime mortgages, their payments increased month after month, stretching his resources thin. At first, Neil had convinced himself that things would turn around. He had always been a problem solver, always finding ways to make things work. But this time, no amount of determination could keep the walls from closing in. With little to no work coming in, and 4 separate mortgages draining their finances. At first, Neil and Frankie tried to hold on, dipping into their savings to stay afloat. But as time passed, their financial situation only worsened. Bills piled up, debt collectors began calling, and the stress of trying to keep everything together was pushing Neil to his limits. Desperate for a solution, he started making risky financial decisions, one bad choice after another, each one digging them deeper into a hole. He chased after risky investments, sought out loans, all in a futile attempt to stop the inevitable collapse. Eventually, the weight of it all became too much to bear. The financial juggling act had run its course. Frankie was exhausted and drained, made the painful decision to stop paying the mortgages on their 3 Florida condos. It was a move that felt like surrender, but they had no choice. There was simply no more money left to give. By the year 2008, the pressure of Neil's business failures had begun to take a serious toll on his health. At first, it started with minor complaints, aches and pains that he couldn't quite explain, but as time went on, his symptoms worsened. He became sluggish, struggling to muster the energy for even the most basic tasks. His body felt heavy, and his mind clouded. He experienced random bouts of dizziness that left him feeling unstable, and he found himself unable to focus the way he used to. Concerned, he visited the family doctor, who ordered a blood test. In October, the results were troubling. Neil had elevated hormone levels, but there was no immediate explanation for his decline. As the weeks passed, his condition only worsened. The once energetic and determined man was now lethargic, withdrawn, barely functioning. He was eventually diagnosed with depression and transient peripheral vertigo, a condition that further contributed to his constant dizziness. In an attempt to help him cope, his doctor prescribed Zoloft, a common antidepressant. Neil, desperate to feel better, took the medication as prescribed, hoping it would offer some relief. But instead of improving, his mental state deteriorated further. A few days after starting Zoloft, he was called back to the doctor's office, where they added a prescription for Xanax. It was meant to ease his anxiety, but his family and friends quickly noticed that something wasn't right. Instead of stabilizing his mood, the medication seemed to send him spiraling even further into darkness. His paranoia intensified, his emotions became more erratic, and Neil they had once known began to fade before their eyes. Neil's sister, Deborah, became deeply concerned about her brother's rapid decline. She confided in their mother, worried about what he was going through. According to Deborah, Neil had started experiencing terrifying hallucinations. He had grown increasingly paranoid, convinced that someone or something was out to get him. Frankie, his wife, was just as alarmed. She desperate for support as Neil's behavior became more and more disturbing. He had completely withdrawn from the world, he refused to go outside, stopped engaging with friends and family, and even neglected his own hygiene. There were days when he wouldn't even shower, lost in a haze of fear and depression. His paranoia took a terrifying turn when he became obsessed with the idea that the FBI was watching him. He was convinced that federal agents were surveilling him, gathering evidence to have him arrested. He would talk about it constantly, warning anyone who would listen that they were building a case against him. His delusions became more elaborate. He was certain that his phone was tapped, that his home was under surveillance, and that at any moment, the authorities would storm in, take him away. His mother saw the full extent of his paranoia. One of the last times she visited him, Neil pulled her aside, his voice shaking with fear. He told her he was in big trouble, insisting that the FBI was coming for him, that he had done something terrible, though he couldn't seem to explain exactly what. The fear in his eyes was real, raw, and overwhelming. As Neil's mind unraveled, January 23, 2010. The darkness he had been wrestling with for months finally took over, and what happened next would shock everyone who had ever known him. That morning, Neil stood before his wardrobe, fumbling with the top shelf, his hands shaking as he retrieved a loaded gun. His wife, Frankie, still groggy from sleep, watched in confusion, not yet realizing the horror that was unfolding before her. Neil, with the gun in hand, stepped out of the wardrobe, his face hardening into something almost unrecognizable. Frankie's heart skipped a beat as the realization hit her. In an instant, panic took over. She leapt toward him, struggling desperately to wrest the weapon from his grasp. They tumbled to the floor, the fight becoming a chaotic blur of screams, desperation, and tears. In the midst of the struggle, Neil, in a violent frenzy, struck Frankie, knocking out her front tooth and slicing her finger. Despite the brutality of it all, Frankie didn't give up. She fought with all her strength, but Neil was too much, overpowering her in his disturbed state. With cold detachment, he stood, reloaded the gun, and turned the weapon on her. 2 shots rang out one after another, each striking her in the face, silencing her forever. But Neil's twisted path didn't end there, covered in Frankie's blood. He reloaded the gun and made his way to his son Eric's room. Eric, who had been lying on his stomach in peaceful sleep, was the next victim in the nightmare that Neil had somehow constructed in his mind. 2 bullets tore through Eric's body, but against all odds, the boy survived the first 2 shots. However, Neil was undeterred, his mind fixated on finishing what he had started. He grabbed a pillow and pressed it over Eric's face, ensuring his son wouldn't survive. 2 more shots, and Eric was gone. The house was eerily still now as Neil moved toward the next room, where his youngest son Joshua was sleeping. Joshua, blissfully unaware of the carnage around him, lay curled in his sheets. Neil's actions were methodical, almost as if he were following a script. He covered his son's face with a pillow, silencing him with 2 shots to the face. In a matter of moments, the vibrant lives of his family had been extinguished, with the blood of his wife and children staining his hands. Neil walked to the bathroom and turned on the shower. He stood under the water, numb, as if washing away the sins he could no longer escape. When the shower ended, he dressed, swallowed a cocktail of Vicodin and Xanax, in a haze, left his home. As he drove, the pills began to take effect, making him groggy and disoriented. Less than a mile from his mother's house, Neil passed out behind the wheel, swerving off the road and coming to a stop in the grass. Neil had initially planned to kill his mother, next before taking his own life. But in his twisted state, something inside him held him back. He later told the police that when he was at home, standing in the living room, he thought about going to heaven to be with his father, but he couldn't leave his mother alone, so he planned to take her with him. Thankfully, he never made it to her house. When the police found him, Neil was disoriented, barely conscious, and gripping the gun beside him. As they approached, he muttered, "I killed my family," in a dazed and broken voice. The investigation raised many questions. Was Neil a victim of the side effects of his medications, or had he planned this horrific act all along? A suicide note found later suggested that Neil may have been preparing for this moment, leaving many to wonder whether he was driven by his medications or if he had, at some point, simply snapped. His attorney's defense centered around his mental state. They argued that he had been suffering from severe depression, anxiety, and paranoia, all of which had been worsened by the medications he was taking. They described Neil overwhelmed by financial ruin, haunted by the fear that the FBI was watching him, and convinced that there was no way out. His legal team insisted that he had not acted out of hatred or rage but had instead been driven to an unimaginable breaking point due to the side effects of his prescription drugs. To support their argument, the defense brought in medical experts who testified about the dangers of Zoloft and Xanax, the two medications Neil had been prescribed before the murders. These drugs, they explained, could cause extreme mood swings, hallucinations, and suicidal tendencies, especially when taken together in high doses. Neil's behavior before the killings, his paranoia, delusions, and refusal to leave the house, was presented as clear evidence that he had lost his grip on reality. His lawyers pushed the narrative that Neil had been a loving father and husband, a man who had never shown any signs of violence before, making it hard to believe that he had killed his family intentionally. But the prosecution had a different story to tell. They painted Neil not as a victim of medication but as a desperate man who had methodically planned the murders. They argued that his financial troubles had reached a boiling point, and that instead of facing them, he had chosen to take his family's lives in an act of ultimate control. They pointed to the way he had executed the killings, retrieving his gun, reloading it multiple times, and ensuring that no one survived. To them, this was not the act of a man lost in a haze of confusion but one who had made a deliberate and calculated decision. One of the most compelling pieces of evidence against Neil was the suicide note found in his home. The note indicated that he had thought through his actions and accepted what he was about to do. It wasn't the frantic scribblings of someone in the middle of a psychotic episode, it was organized, reflective in the prosecution's view, proof of premeditation. If he had truly been unaware of his actions, why would he have left behind such a message? The prosecution also called witnesses to testify about Neil's behavior leading up to the murders. His sister, Deborah, had noticed a dramatic shift in his personality. He had become increasingly paranoid. His wife, Frankie, had confided in Deborah that Neil was no longer the man she had married. He had stopped showering, refused to leave the house, and seemed trapped in his own mind. While the defense used these accounts to argue that Neil was suffering from a mental breakdown, the prosecution used them to show that there had been warning signs, signs that should have led Neil to seek professional help instead of resorting to murder. Neil's mother, Goldie, also played a heartbreaking role in the trial. She had been one of the last people to see him before the tragedy. She recalled how Neil had told her, "Mom, I love you, no matter what happens." The courtroom fell silent. At the time, she hadn't thought much of it, but in hindsight, it was clear he had been preparing for what he was about to do. Goldie, who had always seen her son as a kind and loving man. She struggled to reconcile the Neil she knew with the one on trial for murder. As the trial progressed, the jury was left to decide whether Neil Jacobson had truly been in a state of antidepressants-induced psychosis or if he had coldly and deliberately murdered his wife and children. The prosecution emphasized that Neil had made a series of conscious choices, loading his gun, aiming at his loved ones, and pulling the trigger multiple times. They argued that no matter what struggles he was facing, nothing justified what he had done. The defense, on the other hand, urged the jury to consider his mental state, to see him as a broken man who had been consumed by fear, paranoia, and desperation. After days of deliberation, the jury reached a verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge, while acknowledging the tragedy of the situation, made it clear that no level of financial distress or mental illness excused the murder of innocent children and a devoted wife. Neil Jacobson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. His fate was sealed, and the courtroom was filled with an overwhelming sense of loss. Neil Jacobson reached a plea deal with the state. He changed his plea from not guilty to guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He stated that the reason was the family's mounting financial situation. Now, he will spend the rest of his life behind bars. Neil Jacobson answered to the judge in the Palm Beach County courtroom, admitting that he shot his wife, Frankie, and then shot their twin 7-year-old sons while they were asleep in their Wellington home back. During the family's turn to speak in court, Neil held his head down and never looked up. Even after the trial ended, many questions remained. Could this tragedy have been prevented if Neil had received different treatment? Were the medications to blame, or was he simply a man who refused to face his failures? No one could say for certain what had driven him to this point. However, what was undeniable was that a mother and 2 young boys had lost their lives in the most horrific way possible. Nothing could ever undo that. It was here in 1985 that Captain Gary Eastburn lived with his wife Catherine and their 3 daughters, about 10 minutes from the base where he served. Shortly before the events in question, Captain Gary received a promotion, which required him to undergo training at officer school. Consequently, he had to leave his family for a while, attending officer school in Montgomery, Alabama, for about 10 weeks. This was an important step, as the family was planning to move to England, where Gary could serve in the Royal Air Force. Gary had a strong marriage that lasted for 10 years, and they kept in touch while separated. However, on Saturday, May 11, 1985, Gary tried to call his wife several times, but to no avail. He took advantage of several breaks to call but never received an answer. Finally, he reached out to one of his friends who remained on Fort Bragg and asked him to check on his wife. The man did so, but when he knocked on the door, no one answered. He couldn't wait forever, so he simply left Catherine a note, asking her to call her husband back as soon as she could. While shining a flashlight and walking around the house, the friend accidentally woke up a neighbor named Bob Seafelt. When Gary called Bob, he mentioned that he had no idea what was going on with Catherine, but everything seemed strange. After a fitful night's sleep, Bob woke up the next day, with troubling thoughts swirling in his mind. He noticed that a stack of newspapers had piled up near the neighbor's door and realized he had last seen Catherine leave for the store on Thursday. Bob went to the neighbor's door and knocked, but no one answered. Listening closely, it seemed to Bob that he could hear a child crying inside. Knowing the family well, he assumed it was the youngest daughter, who was about 2 years old at the time. Concerned about the situation, Bob called the police at 12:53 p.m. and asked them to check on the family. When the patrolman arrived at the scene, they began the standard procedure and shone his flashlight through the windows. They saw the baby in a crib, appearing pale and emaciated. Despite the protocol the officer needed to follow, they instinctively felt that something alarming had occurred. A patrolman immediately cut through the window screen and entered the house. Upon entering, he saw the baby girl, who was alive but in dire condition. Later, authorities reported that a few more hours in that house could have been fatal for her. After handing the baby over to his partner, the patrolman returned inside the house, checking the rooms with his weapon drawn. In the main bedroom, he discovered the lifeless body of 3-year-old Erin Eastburn. A pillow covered the child's face, and it was apparent that her throat had been cut, with her head nearly severed from her body. She lay on the floor next to her parents' bed, where Catherine also lay. A pillow covered Catherine's face as well. When the officer removed it, he saw that her throat was cut, she was naked and had suffered multiple stab wounds, indicating she had been abused. The scene was horrifying, with blood everywhere. The patrolman ran outside, trying to catch his breath, when he was reminded that the family had 3 children. They still needed to find one more child who might be alive and in danger. He returned to the house, found Kara, but there were no signs of life. The 5-year-old had died in the same manner as her mother and sister. When the investigation began, detectives quickly noticed that a similar crime had occurred 15 years earlier involving a military family, the MacDonald family, who were killed in a similar fashion. This crime was committed by a military man, a husband and father named Jeffrey. Numerous coincidences were found in the handwriting of the criminals and the circumstances of these two murders, suggesting that they could have been committed by the same person. However, at the time of the massacre of the Eastburn family, Jeffrey MacDonald was already behind bars and could not have been involved in this crime. Rumors spread quickly, leading many to believe that Jeffrey MacDonald could have had an accomplice or an imitator. Forensic experts found blood all over the house, as well as clear traces of cleaning in some places, indicated by X stains of blood. It was obvious that the criminal had tried to clean up but left even more traces. Using luminol, investigators could see that the marks had been erased on the bathroom door handles. Likely, the perpetrator used a towel that had been thrown into the laundry basket. The crime was believed to have been committed between 8 p.m. on May 9th and 3 a.m. on May 10th, 1985. As it turns out, the last person to see the family alive was the nanny, Julie. The young girl had been babysitting the youngest daughter for several days before their bodies were found and was automatically placed on the suspect list. Julie mentioned prank calls that Catherine had complained about before she was killed. Some man had been calling several times a day for 3 months, but it didn't particularly bother Catherine. She didn't feel any danger from these calls and never went to the police. Julie remembered another person with whom Catherine had been in contact, a certain Angela who was going to take the dog from the Eastburns, Dixie. Due to plans to move, they decided to give it away because there was no one to leave it with. According to the nanny, Catherine had left an ad in the newspaper, and after that, she received a call from Angela. Julie was curious about what happened next and unexpectedly shifted the focus back to the bloody crime of 15 years ago. She was worried that it could have been committed by a copycat of Jeffrey MacDonald and wanted to know what the police thought about it. The detective had no trouble getting the suspicious nanny to talk. She willingly shared her long friendship with Dr. MacDonald, believing that he was innocent. They had known each other for a long time and even exchanged letters for several years while he was in prison. When she was asked about her interest in the case, she was unable to justify his behavior, and the detective did not pay much attention to her words. When she confirmed her alibi, he simply removed her from the list of suspects. The police continued to work in the Eastburn house even after midnight, despite the late hour. A young man named Patrick Cohn approached them and decided to tell them about what he saw on the night of Friday, May 10, 1985, at about 3:30 a.m. He noticed a tall, fair-skinned man in jeans, a knitted hat, and a black jacket leaving Eastburn house. The man was carrying a garbage bag slung over his shoulder, got into his white Chevrolet Chevette, and drove away. Patrick's statement was taken seriously, and he was brought to the police station to help create a composite sketch. When the portrait was finished, there was a striking resemblance to a serviceman named Timothy Hennis. He was a 27-year-old man who, along with his younger brother and sister, had been adopted by the Hennis family, a couple who took all 3 of their children from an orphanage. They grew up in a fairly well-off family in Minnesota, which provided them with a bright future. Shortly before these tragic events, Tim married Angela in secret before Christmas in 1984. That same year, Tim's brother died in a motorcycle accident, so they opted for a modest celebration instead of a lavish ceremony. A couple of years later, they had a daughter, Christina. Tim admitted that he was familiar with the victim, Catherine, but there was a good reason for it. They decided to get dog for company, leading to the contact with the woman from the ad. Tim denied any involvement in the crime but mentioned a curious coincidence. He had arranged to meet Catherine on Tuesday, May 7th, just 3 days before the crime, to look at Dixie. When Tim first met the police, everyone was amazed because he looked exactly like the composite sketch. The police asked him to sign a waiver of Miranda rights, to which he agreed, provided he could be assured that he was not a suspect, which turned out to be a ruse. Timothy provided fingerprints, hair samples, saliva, and blood. He confirmed that he had indeed met Catherine that Tuesday and had taken her dog, after which they had not seen each other again. Timothy denied any involvement in the crime and provided a detailed account. Witness Patrick was called to identify him, and he pointed to Timothy. Despite Timothy's insistence that he had not been in the area early in the morning of May 10th, suspicions against him grew stronger due to his lack of an alibi. The police did not yet have an arrest warrant, so Timothy was released. However, after 7 hours, he was detained, officially charged with triple first-degree murder and abuse. Naturally, Timothy was not the only suspect. As is often the case, the police first considered the widower Gary Eastburn. When Gary was informed of the events, he remained surprisingly calm and simply asked if at least one family member had survived. When he learned that only the youngest daughter had survived, he broke down in tears. Gary had grown up as an ordinary young man. At the age of 12, his parents divorced, and his relationship with his stepfather did not work out. Despite this, he had a relatively calm childhood. He met Catherine in 1972, approximately 13 years before the tragedy. At that time, he was around 25 years old, having been born in 1947. Their daughter Kara was born in 1980. Gary decided to become a military man to support his growing family. When he finally returned to the city after the tragedy, he wanted to reach his surviving child. Instead, he was immediately taken to the police station for questioning, where they held him until about 2 a.m. Gary provided a reliable alibi. His blood and hair samples were taken before he was released. He was able to see his daughter late at night. She was in serious condition and did not even recognize him. Afterward, he went into their home to see what was missing. Gary had no idea who could have attacked his wife and children. They had no obvious enemies, but he remembered several prank calls that had started a few months before he left for training at officer school. The caller addressed Catherine by her first and last name, but no one paid attention to it at the time. Everyone thought it was just teenagers playing around, so no one raised the alarm. Now, in light of the tragic events, the calls seemed more suspicious. However, they could not be tracked due to a lack of technology at that time. After inspecting the house, the police reported that a metal safe containing important family documents was missing, along with $300 in cash that had been set aside for Christmas and Catherine's wallet with bank cards. This provided valuable clues. The ATM was identified, and it turned out that a transaction was made using Catherine's card. It was used shortly after the murders, including a transaction on May 11th. Detectives found a witness who provided a description of the man who came at night to withdraw cash, and this description exactly matched Timothy Hennis. In addition, she saw a white car belonging to Timothy. At this stage, the whole city already knew about the crime and the main suspect. Other witnesses also came forward. Timothy's neighbor saw him burning something in his backyard the day after the murder, likely getting rid of evidence. A local dry cleaner reported that Timothy had brought them a black jacket right after the crime. According to the description, it resembled the clothing that the witness Patrick had described. Timothy was questioned when his ex-wife said he had come to visit her that fateful night. His landlord mentioned that Timothy had not paid the rent for the house, which had accumulated over $300 in debt, but as soon as the eviction notice was served on May 10th, Timothy paid it off almost immediately. But where did he get the money so quickly? It seems strange that the same amount disappeared from the home of the murdered family. Indirect evidence against Timothy was accumulating, but there was no irrefutable proof. By Christmas, it was decided to allow the suspect to post bail with the help of his relatives, and he managed to raise the funds. The reason for this leniency was the results of laboratory tests indicating that his biological materials did not match any evidence. Specifically, his blood type did not match. However, this could be attributed to the low accuracy of the testing methods used at that time. The prosecutor's office decided to turn to the only survivor of that bloody night, 2-year-old Jana. After the tragedy, the girl had not been able to come to her senses for a long time, but by February of the following year, she finally spoke. Gary was categorically against involving his daughter in the investigation, fearing that she would suffer further psychological trauma, but under pressure from the police, he ultimately agreed in order to seek justice for the victims. A special psychologist from North Carolina held 5 recorded conversations with Jana. During this time, she experienced several panic attacks and was still unable to recognize Timothy's photo. Based on the results of these sessions, it remained unclear whether there was one perpetrator or multiple criminals. Thus, the prosecutor's office decided to refuse to use Jana's testimony in the case. The trial was set for April 27, 1986. Timothy rejected the plea bargain offered by the prosecution. His lawyer wanted to change the location of the hearing but ultimately decided it would not make much difference. Instead, the defense focused on refuting the numerous circumstantial evidence on which the prosecution's case was based. The lawyer argued that the witness Patrick was lying when he claimed to have seen Timothy, described his appearance and car in such detail, especially since it had happened at night. He questioned how Patrick could have seen all of this in the dark. The lawyer discovered that the witness was going through a difficult time and had been pressured by the police. During numerous meetings with Timothy's lawyer, Patrick admitted that he might have made a mistake during the identification. The more he talked with the defense, the less certain he became about having seen Timothy on the street that night. On the day of the trial, the lawyer tried to get Patrick to admit that he had participated in the identification under pressure from detectives, but he did not. The defense discovered something even more significant. During the investigation, the police had gained access to the Fort Bragg duty log, which showed that Tim was on duty at the time of the crime, but this page mysteriously disappeared during the investigation. The lawyer believed that the detectives had intentionally torn out this page. Now, the defense attorney pressed this fact, interpreting the police's behavior as an attempt to convict an innocent person by destroying evidence of his innocence. Timothy's family was away at the time of the crime. The prosecution proposed a theory that Timothy had taken advantage of his wife's absence to start a romantic relationship with Catherine and visited her home on that fateful evening. However, Catherine rejected his advances, which angered him, leading him to kill her and her 2 children. The discussion then turned to the bank card. It was determined that the payment method had been used at 2:52 a.m. on May 11th when the defendant was on duty. Although this could not be confirmed, there was reasonable doubt that Timothy could have used it. Even though there was still no confirmed alibi for the night of the crime, the lawyers systematically managed to destroy the majority of the prosecution's arguments and raised doubts among the jury in order to convince them of Timothy's innocence. The prosecution presented frightening photographs from the crime scene and autopsies of the victims, about 100 photographs, which were included in a slideshow that lasted more than an hour. The tension in the courtroom was palpable. Despite the defense attorney's desperate attempts to convince the jury of the defendant's innocence, on July 4, 1986, Timothy Hennis was found guilty on all counts. The defense attorney believed that the main reason for this verdict was their failure to insist on a change of venue. He felt that his job was not finished since Timothy was sentenced to death, so he focused on saving his client's life. Interestingly, just a few days after starting his sentence, Timothy received a postcard in prison signed by Mr. X. In it, a mysterious stranger claimed responsibility for killing Timothy's family and apologized for Timothy serving time for his crimes. Mr. X admitted that he had left North Carolina and had no intention of returning. Timothy informed his lawyer about the postcard. Later, it was used at the retrial, but at the time of its receipt, the prosecutor dismissed it as a forgery. During this period, Timothy's parents rallied around him. Despite their divorce, they made every effort to save enough money to pay for his defense. The Supreme Court of North Carolina was approached, and the lawyers cited bias, arguing that the jury had been provoked by the photographs. The defense insisted that nearly 100 gruesome images from the massacre were guaranteed to elicit a negative reaction from the jury. Despite the lack of irrefutable evidence against Timothy, it came to light that several detectives who led the case were nearing retirement. The lawyers believed they simply did not want to leave behind an unsolved crime of such magnitude and were seeking a scapegoat, which they considered Timothy Hennis to be. The defense successfully secured a change of venue to Wilmington, a coastal town located 100 kilometers from Fayetteville. The new prosecutor agreed to this change without hesitation, confident in the prosecution's tactics, but the defense was well prepared and closed all loopholes except for one. There was still no reliable confirmation of the defendant's whereabouts on the night of the murder. The defense aimed to discredit the prosecution's main witness, Patrick, in court. During the interval between the first and second trials, Patrick had committed several minor offenses, including driving without a license. When stopped by the authorities, he advised them to contact the district attorney since he was a witness in the Timothy case. The lawyers believed this statement practically indicated that he had received a bribe from the very beginning. More thorough examinations of the collected evidence refuted the case against Timothy. The shoe prints found inside the house were 3 sizes smaller than his. There was blood on a towel in the bathroom, as well as other traces that did not match his profile. The defense presented a black jacket to the judge that was tested for bloodstains. Even the hair found on Catherine's body did not belong to Timothy. In this context, the numerous circumstantial pieces of evidence that the prosecutor's office had used in the first trial appeared less convincing during the retrial. The prosecution attempted to challenge all the defense's arguments with their own versions, but none of this was compelling in light of the thorough preparation from the defense. 2 days later, the jury found Timothy not guilty on all counts. It is noteworthy that during this hearing, only a few photographs from the crime scene were shown, as opposed to the 100 images in a lengthy slideshow during the first trial. 3 years later, Timothy was released from death row. He re-enlisted in military service, served in Saudi Arabia and Somalia, and then returned to the United States. In 1998, Timothy and his family settled in Fort Lewis, Washington. In 2004, he retired from the Army and took a job at a waste processing plant. He also became a Boy Scout leader. Meanwhile, widower Gary followed his plan and moved with his surviving daughter to the UK. In 2009, he served in the Royal Air Force, after which he married a nurse. In 2009, after leaving the Air Force, Gary returned to the U.S. and settled in Washington. Subsequently, legislation was amended to prohibit retrials for individuals already convicted twice of the same crime. Disagreements arose on the basis that during the first trial, Timothy was in military service, thereby placing him under a different jurisdiction. This left the state in limbo, although it did not exclude the possibility that he could be brought to retrial. Despite such situations being rare in the state's judicial practice, they did not return to the case for almost 20 years. It seemed that life was improving, but the case of the triple murder remained unsolved. Finally, in 2006, a detective investigating particularly brutal murders decided to test the DNA materials collected from the body of Catherine. However, the only information the laboratory could provide at that time was that the collected samples belonged to a light-skinned individual. By 2010, the laboratory in North Carolina became embroiled in a significant scandal. It turned out that over the past decade and a half, the state crime lab systematically concealed or manipulated evidence to ensure convictions. This was revealed in at least 230 cases, 10 of which resulted in the wrongful conviction of innocent people sentenced to death. 3 of them even received lethal injections and were deprived of life. The DNA in the Eastburn case was retested, and the examination showed that the materials from the crime scene in the archive matched those of Timothy Hennis. In light of such convincing evidence, his trial was reopened for the 3rd time. Timothy hired the best military lawyer named Frank Spinner to lead his defense team. The lawyer attempted to tarnish the reputation of the victim, Catherine, by alleging that she was promiscuous with Timothy, hinting that that was why his DNA might have turned up in her home. Timothy argued that she was unfaithful to him and that the real killer was an individual named Mr. X, who had written a postcard to him while he was in prison. This attempt had the opposite effect. The prosecutor's office pointed out the obvious lie, as Timothy had previously denied any intimate contact with Catherine. He later claimed that he initially did not disclose the affair due to fear of exposure. Despite a fierce struggle for Timothy's freedom, the chosen tactics now appeared unconvincing. On April 15, 2010, a jury recommended that Hennis be sentenced to death. In addition, he was demoted to Private E1, stripped of all pay and allowances, dishonorably discharged from the United States Army. Hennis was incarcerated at the United States Disciplinary Barracks at Fort Leavenworth in Kansas, where he remains to this day. All his subsequent appeals were rejected. Under U.S. legislation, without the president's approval, they cannot execute him. Therefore, the likelihood that he will be deprived of life is low. The U.S. military has not executed anyone from its ranks since 1961. Interestingly, in 1985, when the murders of the Eastburn family occurred, a 20-year-old woman from Rochester, Minnesota, where Tim had lived for a long time, contacted the police to share her story. Upon hearing about the triple murder in North Carolina, she revealed that at the age of 11, she had been abused by Timothy Hennis. Unfortunately, due to a data error, she was not permitted to testify. Had she been allowed to do so, the outcome of the second trial, when he was acquitted, could have been entirely different, and he would most likely have been found guilty again. Even now, this trial raises more questions than answers. The story of the nanny, who cared for the Eastburn children, also raises many questions. Julie was addicted, and there were witnesses who heard her confess to the crime. Additionally, her unhealthy obsession with Jeffrey MacDonald, with whom she even corresponded, raises further doubts. Some supporters of Timothy believe that it was Julie who could have imitated her idol and killed the family with whom she worked. Katrina Wright's brow was originally from Germany. There, she met an American serviceman named Charles, and they fell in love and got married. After their wedding, Charles brought Katrina to the United States, where they settled in a small town called Ayer, Massachusetts, which had around 5,000 residents. Together, they had 2 children, a son and a daughter. After leaving the military, Charles worked at a local factory that made knives and surgical instruments, providing for the family while Katrina stayed at home as a housewife. Katrina and Charles enjoyed a long life together filled with happy moments. As their children grew up and started their own lives, Katrina remained active, social, and energetic. When her children visited on weekends, she joyfully danced and had fun with her daughter. It was often hard to find her at home. In contrast, Charles was quiet, reserved, and calm. In 1980, Katrina was on the verge of realizing her long-held dream. She wanted to return to Germany to see how her home country had changed and to visit relatives and friends with whom she had kept in touch through letters over the years. To make this trip possible, she saved money for a long time but was so anxious about the possibility of her savings being stolen that she carried a large amount of cash in an envelope with her everywhere she went. This included outings to local restaurants with friends and family. When they learned about her money-carrying habit, they were surprised and often questioned her reasoning. It seemed odd to them that Katrina wasn't afraid to walk around with so much cash, especially since it posed a risk to her safety. However, Katrina believed that leaving the money at home unattended was even riskier. She felt that if she kept cash, her travel savings would be safe. At 48 years old, she truly thought her concerns were unfounded, at least until May 21, 1980. On that day, as usual, Charles left for work around 7 a.m., while Katrina stayed home a bit longer before heading to her job. However, by 10 a.m., her colleagues began to worry because she had not arrived at work. This was unusual for her. They attempted to call her, but she didn't answer. They also couldn't reach Charles, as he was out of contact during his shift, and mobile phones had not yet been invented. To save time, her colleagues began contacting the couple's closest relatives whose phone numbers they had. They were able to reach the daughter-in-law who lived next door to Katrina. She agreed to check on Katrina. At 10:45, she went to the address. She knocked on the door and windows several times, but there was no response. Her calls went unanswered, and the windows were tightly covered. When she tried to get inside, she found the front door was unlocked. As soon as she opened the door, it was clear that a struggle had occurred in the house. In the kitchen, she found Katrina lying on the floor, bleeding and unresponsive. The room showed signs of a violent confrontation, with furniture, appliances, and books scattered all around. The sink was soaked with water and blood, creating a horrifying scene. The daughter-in-law immediately called 911 for help, hoping that Katrina could be saved. However, she was too scared to remain in the house and waited for emergency responders outside. Paramedics quickly arrived at the house but were unable to save Katrina, who had already died. Detectives were immediately on the scene to investigate the crime. It became clear that the likely killer knew Katrina, as evidenced by the violence of the attack and the fact that the windows and locks were undamaged. This suggested that Katrina either let the attacker in willingly or he had a key. The assault took place in the kitchen, where the attacker used water to wash something in the sink, likely his hands or face. The kitchen remained messy, with blood and water splattered around. A faint fingerprint was discovered on the screen, while a clearer print was found on a toaster lying on the floor. Additionally, several hairs were found clutched in Katrina's fist, likely pulled from the attacker during a struggle. Unfortunately, DNA analysis techniques were still in their infancy at that time, so investigators could only collect and store the evidence for future analysis. Forensic scientists focused on the fingerprints they found. An expert determined that Katrina had been attacked multiple times. The suspected murder weapon, a paring knife, was discovered in the trash under the sink. The murder occurred in the kitchen, and it was clear that the house had been ransacked. The victim, Katrina, had her jewelry stolen, along with an envelope containing money she had saved for a trip back to her homeland. Initially, law enforcement believed the motive behind the crime was the stolen money. However, Katrina was determined to keep her savings, which led her to fight back against the robber, resulting in her tragic death. The numerous stab wounds also suggested a possible personal motive. Investigators looked into Katrina's personal life but found no one who could commit such a violent act. She did not have any obvious enemies and was not vocal about having money in her home, with only her closest friends knowing about her savings. This limited circle led them to suspect her husband, Charles. They theorized that the murder might have taken place before he left for work around 7 a.m. Evidence linked the murder weapon, a knife, to Charles, as it was produced by the company where he worked. He acknowledged that this knife was often used in their kitchen. While many residents owned similar knives, the knife in question had been thoroughly cleaned, which raised suspicions. During the interrogation, Charles expressed deep sorrow over his wife's death. He had been married to her for decades and appeared genuinely grief-stricken. Still, the fact that the perpetrator used a kitchen knife instead of a premeditated weapon was unusual for such a crime. Despite his apparent distress, Charles was subjected to a polygraph test, which he passed. In addition to the numerous stab wounds, Katrina had suffered a blow to the head from a blunt object, likely a lamp found broken near her body in the kitchen. Ultimately, with the collection of fingerprints and blood samples from the scene and after questioning Charles, the police decided to send him home. From the beginning, he was hesitant to go home because it reminded him of the tragedy. In 1980, there were no specialized companies for crime scene cleanup, so he had to rely on his relatives for assistance. Consequently, Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law ended up cleaning the kitchen and removing blood from various surfaces. They also expressed their concerns to the authorities, who believed that Katrina's attacker might have been someone she knew personally. To understand what happened, they explored various possibilities. During their conversations, they recalled a 25-year-old man named Kenneth Walters. Born on August 16, 1953, Kenneth was 26 at the time of the crime. He comes from a large, troubled family. He lives near Katrina, and some of his relatives are facing legal troubles. Kenneth himself had a history of minor criminal offenses. Before reaching adulthood, he had been arrested for participating in a knife fight. Since it was his first offense, he received a fine and was required to perform community service. A few weeks prior to Katrina's death, Kenneth had attacked law enforcement officers. Although a trial was scheduled for the day she was murdered, he was released on bail beforehand. Kenneth worked as a cook at a restaurant that Katrina frequently visited to spend time with her friends and family. While she did not interact with him directly, he might have learned about her possessing a large sum of money, possibly by overhearing her conversations during his shifts. Katrina's daughter and daughter-in-law informed the police of their suspicions regarding him. Law enforcement officers decided to investigate Kenneth as a potential suspect in the murder. They spoke with him, but he denied any involvement and did not show any typical signs of a murderer. However, his previous involvement in a knife fight raised suspicions against him. When the police interviewed Kenneth again, he provided a solid alibi, supported by documentation. He had a time card that clearly indicated the hours he worked at the restaurant, which confirmed his statement. His colleagues, who were on duty with him that night, also verified his alibi. Kenneth explained that he left home the night before at 10 p.m., worked the night shift, and did not leave the restaurant until around 9 a.m. the next morning. A friend drove him back home, where his girlfriend could also confirm his presence. He did not stay long at home. He quickly changed clothes, took a shower, and left. By 10 a.m., he was attending a court hearing related to an incident involving a police officer. Given his tight schedule, he simply did not have the opportunity to commit the crime before his court appearance. Kenneth dressed neatly and left for court, where he remained until 11 a.m. Afterward, he returned to the restaurant and stayed there until 12:30 p.m. When he got home, he encountered the police, who were canvassing the neighborhood. They spoke with him, examined his clothes and body for any blood or scratches, finding none, which did not raise any suspicion. A forensic expert determined that the murder occurred around 7 a.m., likely soon after her husband Charles left for work. Detectives believed the crime could have taken place between 7 and 10:45 a.m., when the body was discovered. Given the limited time Kenneth had before the trial, it seemed unlikely that he could have committed the crime and escaped unnoticed. After verifying Kenneth's alibi, he was removed from the list of suspects due to a lack of evidence of criminal activity. However, investigators did not completely rule him out of the investigation as the case progressed, though they did not find any new evidence. Fingerprints retrieved from the crime scene did not match any in existing databases, which were not very advanced at that time. The investigation stalled for 2 years with little to no progress. During this time, a man named Robert Osborne contacted the police, claiming he had important information regarding Catherine's murder. However, he expected to receive a reward for his testimony. Detectives indicated that a reward could only be offered to someone providing valuable information that led to an arrest. Robert suggested that law enforcement should interview Kenneth's ex-girlfriend, Brenda Marsh. At the time of the call, Robert was dating Brenda and was familiar with Kenneth's situation. He claimed that Kenneth had confessed to the murder during a private conversation. By the time the police received this tip, Brenda had already broken up with Kenneth, who was living elsewhere. Brenda confirmed that at the time of Katrina's murder, she and Kenneth were living together. She described Kenneth as rude and cruel. Brenda had a daughter with him, and they were struggling financially. Following the advice of Robert, her new boyfriend, she decided to turn Kenneth in, hoping to receive a reward that would help her situation. According to Brenda, on the evening of May 20, 1980, Kenneth left their home around 10 p.m. to go to work at a restaurant. However, when they called the restaurant later, they found out that Kenneth had not arrived there at the expected time. Brenda was uncertain about what time Kenneth returned home or whether he had gone to the restaurant at all. The next morning, he came back with a deep, fresh scratch on his face that was still bleeding. When Brenda asked him about it, he replied that it was none of her business. He quickly changed his clothes, took a shower, and left for a court appointment. When Kenneth returned from court regarding an assault case, Brenda informed him that the police were already investigating at their home. Kenneth was very upset about this and told Brenda that if the police asked her about him, she should say he hadn't lived there for about a month. After the investigation stalled, they relocated and waited a bit to avoid drawing attention to their escape. Brenda attempted to inquire about the incident with Kenneth, but he brushed off her concerns, stating that it was none of her business. However, one night, while drunk, he revealed that he had interacted with a German woman to take her money. Kenneth's testimony was contradicted by his time card, which showed he arrived at work on time and left only at 9 a.m. Brenda's statements also conflicted with the fact that Kenneth spoke to the police when he returned home and had no visible scratches on his face. Brenda's suspicions seemed unfounded. She could simply be a scorned ex seeking revenge on Kenneth. To clarify the situation, she was offered a polygraph test, which she took and passed. The detectives then decided to conduct a further investigation into Kenneth's background. They found another ex-girlfriend who claimed that Kenneth had also confessed to murdering a German woman, whom he referred to casually. Despite this new testimony, there was still little evidence against him. The fingerprints found on the toaster and faucet in the kitchen where Katrina died did not match Kenneth. This investigation took place in 1982, before DNA testing was available. To eliminate any doubts, they compared Kenneth's blood type with the blood found at the scene, and they matched it. The detectives viewed this as solid evidence of Kenneth's guilt, despite the low accuracy of such comparisons. It appeared that the prosecutor was eager to close the case quickly and needed someone to blame. Given the personal nature of the crime and its brutality, the police decided to thoroughly search for a possible motive. Kenneth had a difficult childhood that significantly shaped his life. He harbored a long-standing dislike for Katrina, feeling resentful towards her and her children. They all grew up together, and Katrina's children often boasted about their pocket money, which upset Kenneth because his family struggled financially. One day, driven by frustration, Kenneth and his sister broke into Katrina's house, stealing sweets and money from her children's piggy bank. At that time, Kenneth was only 10 years old. Katrina was understandably furious and insisted on taking action against him for his unacceptable behavior. Then, Kenneth was taken from his family and placed in a juvenile correctional facility at age 10. There, he faced harsh conditions alongside older teens who had committed more serious offenses. Kenneth found this experience traumatic and rarely spoke about it, yet he held a deep resentment towards Katrina for her role in his imprisonment. Despite the hostility he faced from others, his sister, Betty Ann, supported him. Although she was younger, Betty was very close to Kenneth and always believed he was innocent. Despite Betty's support, Kenneth was arrested 2 years after Katrina's tragic death and charged with her murder. The hearing was set for 1983. Kenneth remained calm about the upcoming trial, confident in his alibi, which was supported by a timesheet. However, from the very beginning, the odds were stacked against him. His former girlfriend, Brenda, testified against him, sharing even more information than before. She claimed to have been in close contact with a friend of Katrina's who had previously dated Kenneth. Catherine's friend stated that Kenneth had given her a ring a few months after Catherine's death. Upon seeing the ring, Brenda realized it resembled one she had seen on Katrina before the murder. Photos of the ring were presented as evidence during the trial. The prosecution utilized clever tactics and presented various pieces of circumstantial evidence. Kenneth's lawyer believed he had a good chance of avoiding a conviction and advised him not to testify in his own defense. However, when it was time to present evidence of Kenneth's innocence, the timesheet had mysteriously disappeared. Without it, and relying only on his family's claims that he was a good person, there was no substantial proof to support his innocence. Consequently, Kenneth Walters was found guilty and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The defense argued that Kenneth was fortunate that the state did not have the death penalty, otherwise, he would have faced execution. Kenneth maintained his innocence and requested a retrial, but only his sister Betty supported him. Others believed she was too emotionally attached and forgave him for his past mistakes. His history of wrongdoings influenced the jury's decision against him. Initially, his lawyer believed in his innocence and worked diligently to exonerate him. However, all appeals were denied. As time passed, the lawyer's enthusiasm dwindled. Kenneth lost the opportunity to have his case reconsidered and was left to serve a life sentence in prison. His family believed his imprisonment was due to his lack of financial resources. He could not afford a skilled lawyer. After all his appeals were turned down, no attorney wanted to take on his case. Kenneth accepted his fate, but Betty remained determined. She frequently visited him in prison and continued to believe in his innocence, steadfastly pursuing justice on his behalf. Kenneth had a difficult personality and frequently caused problems in prison, which made it hard for anyone to make excuses for his behavior. He even tried to end his life out of despair. During one visit, Betty was unable to see him because he was in solitary confinement after getting into a fight with another inmate. Once he was released from solitary, they were able to meet, and Betty had a heartfelt conversation with him, expressing her determination to help him get out of prison. Their trust in lawyers had faded, especially since many refused to take on Kenneth's case. Betty felt she could only rely on herself. At that time, she hadn't completed high school and lacked the necessary education. She had also divorced her husband, who had discouraged her from helping Kenneth. As a single mother of two, she worked as a waitress, struggling to support herself and her children, but she remained committed to helping Kenneth. Betty first focused on finishing high school and then enrolled in college. She managed to balance her night shifts as a waitress while raising her kids. Despite the challenges, her determination and strong feelings propelled her forward. Betty eventually became a lawyer, fully knowledgeable about Kenneth's case but puzzled about how his timesheet went missing. Additionally, she discovered that Brenda, who reported a large scratch on Kenneth's face the day Katrina was murdered, had lied, as Kenneth had been in court, then at a restaurant, and later speaking with detectives. Those reports did not mention any injuries on Kenneth. It was odd that no one else noticed the scratch. Detectives typically pay close attention to such details, especially since Kenneth was one of the suspects from the beginning. Betty continuously reviewed the evidence and found substantial confirmation of her suspicions. Furthermore, she learned that Brenda did not actually take a polygraph test. Instead, Brenda only passed a voice test, which can indicate lies but is less reliable than a polygraph. Kenneth successfully passed the lie detector test, which should have worked in his favor, but this detail was not mentioned during the trial. As Betty investigated the circumstances surrounding Kenneth's conviction, she increasingly realized that law enforcement had seemingly chosen him as a scapegoat. Brenda went to the police after realizing that Kenneth had received a life sentence and admitted that she had lied under pressure from Robert, who hoped to gain financially. She also desired revenge on her ex, Kenneth, and felt pressured by the police. Now, she regretted that her actions had led to an innocent man being imprisoned for life. Another ex-girlfriend also revealed that she testified against Kenneth due to pressure from a female police officer who had a personal bias against him and was intent on seeing him convicted. It wasn't until 1999 that Betty gained access to significant evidence, specifically DNA samples collected from the crime scene. She uncovered a box of documents and samples, including blood and hair, that had never been analyzed before. The examination revealed that the DNA from the crime scene did not match Kenneth's. However, both law enforcement and the public worked to prevent the case from being reopened, while Katrina's family strongly resisted any new investigation. In 2000, Betty successfully reached out to the Innocence Project, a group of lawyers dedicated to assisting wrongfully convicted individuals. This organization had a team of experts and the resources needed to conduct thorough investigations. Betty presented evidence proving Kenneth's innocence, convincing the project to take on his case. She also contacted a female police officer involved in the investigation, who had a questionable reputation and had previously compromised her credibility in another case. Many in law enforcement spoke poorly of her, raising suspicions that she had intentionally framed Kenneth and had not lost key evidence by chance. Furthermore, inconsistencies in the testimonies of Kenneth's former girlfriends were exposed, particularly regarding a ring that was shown to the jury. It was discovered that the ring had been sent to Germany and did not match the jewelry owned by Kenneth's ex-girlfriend. It was smaller and unsuitable for Katrina. Betty sought to find the ring to counter another piece of evidence against Kenneth. She learned that the ring had initials engraved on it that did not belong to Katrina. Ultimately, due to Betty's extensive efforts in uncovering these discrepancies, the case was reopened, and the prosecutor dropped the charges against Kenneth. After spending 18 years, 5 months, and 10 days in prison, Kenneth was finally acquitted and became a free man. He was able to enjoy life again after being deprived of it for so long. Unfortunately, tragedy struck. On September 19, 2001, while visiting his brother's house, Kenneth decided to take a shortcut that required him to climb over a tall wall. He did not realize the wall on the other side was even higher. When he jumped from a height of 15 feet, he fell awkwardly, struck his head, and later died in the hospital. Betty, Kenneth's sister, remembered that those 6 months after his release were the happiest of his life. After so many years in prison, everything felt new to him. Even after his death, Betty continued to fight for justice. In 2004, she filed a lawsuit against the city for the wrongful imprisonment of Kenneth and the impact it had on their lives. By 2009, she successfully won the case, receiving $10.5 million in compensation. In this story, Katrina's murder case remains unsolved and often forgotten. The blood found at the crime scene was tested, but no matches were found in the police database. The identity of the person who brutally took her life remains unknown. Her family hopes that one day, the case will be solved. Oscar Pistorius, a famous Paralympic champion, is originally from South Africa and lives in the city of Pretoria. He was born on November 22, 1986, with a serious developmental disorder that caused his legs to be thin and underdeveloped. Oscar's family went through many hardships, and his parents often argued. He had a younger sister, and after her birth, his parents decided to divorce. However, his father continued to support the family financially. Oscar's mother taught him that one should not give up in difficult situations, but should fight instead. Growing up, Oscar was an active child. When he was just 1 year old, he had to have his legs amputated below the knee because they were not growing. At 17 months old, he was fitted with his first prosthetic legs. As Oscar grew older, he became stronger and decided to pursue a career in sports. He initially played rugby and water polo, but after injuring his kneecap as a teenager, he was advised to take up athletics for rehabilitation. Over time, his passion for athletics developed, particularly for short-distance running. At the age of 15, Oscar lost his mother, who had been his close friend and supporter in all his endeavors. This loss deeply affected him, leading to emotional distress, but he remained determined to continue his training and pursue his goals. His hard work paid off when, at 17, he won a bronze medal in the 100-meter race and a gold medal in the 200-meter race at the Athens Paralympic Games in 2004. In 2007, he showcased his talent again by finishing second in the 400-meter race. Despite his young age, Oscar has achieved incredible success that many can only dream of. He has attracted significant media attention and built a large fan base, earning him the nickname "the man who runs on blades," due to his special prosthetic legs and impressive speed. By 2012, Oscar had reached the peak of his athletic career. During this time, he met Riva Steenkamp, a 29-year-old South African model and law graduate, through a mutual friend named Justin. They felt an instant connection, often described as love at first sight, and began dating. They officially got engaged in 2013. Riva grew up in Cape Town with her father, Barry, her mother, June Steenkamp, and 2 half-brothers. The family later moved to Port Elizabeth, where she pursued a law degree at university. Riva was not only intelligent, graduating with honors, but she was also very attractive. She started modeling at the age of 14, initially as a hobby, but soon began to take it more seriously. By the age of 29, she had become a well-known face in fashion magazines, frequently appearing on television and participating in various shows. However, her life wasn't without challenges. At 20, she was involved in a serious accident while riding. Riva's father, Barry, was a renowned horse trainer and breaker. He introduced his daughter to riding at a young age, starting her off with a pony. When Riva was 20, she suffered a serious lower back injury after falling from a horse, which required her to nearly relearn how to walk. By 2012, she had fully recovered and had achieved both wealth and fame, similar to Oscar. Their first meeting was unplanned, but they encountered each other again at a major award event where Oscar was being honored. Photographers captured them together, and the media quickly labeled them a stunning couple, taking numerous photos and asking questions. Both Riva and Oscar were talented in their respective fields and appeared to be a perfect match. Eventually, they developed feelings for each other, began dating, and got engaged. On Valentine's Day, February 14, 2013, Oscar and Riva celebrated 3 months of their relationship with a dinner at Oscar's home. Oscar lived in a mansion located within a gated community, where all the houses were similar to his and were surrounded by tall fences for security. The residents were very wealthy and took extensive measures to protect themselves, such as using CCTV cameras, combination locks, and other security systems. The cameras at the entrance captured the arrival of Oscar and Riva. They enjoyed a romantic candlelight dinner and stayed up late into the night. Later, someone told the police that they had heard the sound of weapons exploding in Oscar's villa. Emergency services quickly arrived at the scene where a crowd had gathered to understand what had happened. Paramedics entered the house and found a girl lying on the bathroom floor, covered in blood. After examining her, they realized she was beyond help. She was dead. Oscar was found in the house, in a state of shock. The police tried to calm him, but he was so distressed that he couldn't comprehend what they were saying. He cried and screamed, eventually managing to explain that he had killed her because he thought she was a burglar. According to Oscar, after dinner, he and Riva went to bed. Early the next morning, he went out onto the balcony to get some fresh air, predicting that it would be a hot day. Suddenly, he heard a noise coming from the bathroom. Although he knew Riva was in bed with him, he didn't check on her. Believing that someone had broken into the house, he took a weapon from the nightstand where he always kept it. In his youth, he had been attacked by an unstable person and had received threats from envious individuals, which is why he took security seriously and kept weapons at home. That morning, however, he hadn't put on his prostheses and felt defenseless. When he heard a noise behind the bathroom door, he attacked it, trying to act quickly. Unfortunately, there was no burglar, only Riva, who had woken up and gone to the bathroom. Upon realizing her tragic mistake, she screamed for help, but it was too late. An investigation showed that Riva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. An investigation showed that Riva had been attacked 4 times. The first bullet struck her thigh, the second ricocheted and hit her back, the third shot hit her shoulder, and the final, fatal shot struck her head, killing her instantly. Early in the morning, Riva's family received a phone call that filled June, her mother, with dread. She hesitated to answer, knowing that calls at such an early hour often bring bad news. Inspector Bada delivered the heartbreaking information, causing her world to crumble. She struggled to stay upright as her legs gave way. Riva's father experienced several heart attacks after learning of her death. The next time they would see their daughter would be at the crematorium to say their goodbyes. Riva's mother, June, quickly informed the police of her concerns about Oscar, noting that her daughter and Oscar had ongoing issues. Although they were still in a relationship which had lasted only 3 months, it was clear that things were coming to an end. Riva's friend supported this perspective, revealing that Riva had expressed her desire to clarify their relationship on Valentine's Day and to break up amicably while remaining friends. Both the mother and friend shared similar views on the situation. In contrast, Oscar's friends expressed a different opinion, claiming that he was very happy in his relationship with Riva. The murder of Riva, a well-known model, by Oscar, a prominent Paralympic athlete, attracted significant media attention, leading to varying public opinions about the incident. Some people believed Oscar's explanation that the attack was accidental, while others suspected he may have had intentions to harm Riva. The authorities had not reached a consensus on Oscar's version of the incident. Many aspects of Oscar's story seemed to align with the details of his relationship with Riva. Friends of both Oscar and Riva stated that they were deeply in love, with Riva's friends confirming her happiness in this new relationship. She had previously experienced toxic relationships and felt fortunate to have found a good partner. Surveillance footage from a supermarket 2 days before the incident showed Oscar and Riva happily hugging and kissing while they shopped, appearing to be a couple in good spirits. This footage was presented as evidence during the investigation. However, a confusing detail emerged. Riva's friend claimed that she planned to visit Oscar's house on Valentine's Day to end their relationship, which raises questions. Why would she choose such a romantic day for a breakup? Additionally, during a police search of Oscar's home, they discovered a gift that Riva had prepared for him, a beautifully decorated frame with a collage of their happy moments together, accompanied by a heartfelt note expressing her love. This made it hard to believe that she intended to break up with him before giving such a romantic gift. The trial received significant media coverage, revealing an important detail. Oscar was deeply concerned about his safety and feared that someone might break into his house at night. This fear had troubled him since childhood, possibly inherited from his mother. After Oscar's parents separated, his mother and the children continued to live in a cottage where a thief had once broken in. Oscar, who has used prosthetic legs since birth, would take them off at home, leaving him vulnerable and unable to escape in an emergency. This fear was corroborated by Oscar's psychologist and his brother's friends. The weapon he had that morning was unlicensed and intended for self-defense. Riva's mother, June, informed the police that Riva's relationship with Oscar had recently taken a turn for the worse. A friend of Riva confirmed this, and several neighbors provided further insight. One woman testified that she heard Riva scream the night of the murder, describing it as a scream filled with fear, indicating that Riva was terrified for her life. Another neighbor, called as a witness by the defense, claimed he heard screams too, but he was convinced they were from a man, not a woman. Furthermore, during the trial, it was revealed that Riva was found on the bathroom floor, with the door locked and her mobile phone in hand. While it was normal for her to get up at night to use the bathroom, the locked door raises questions, particularly because she brought her phone with her. The prosecution investigated Oscar's history and discovered that years ago, he was involved in a serious boating accident on a river. He crashed into an obstacle and required immediate medical attention. Doctors performed surgery to repair his broken jaw and ribs, providing over 100 stitches. He was also diagnosed with a concussion and remained in a coma for several days. When police arrived at the scene, they found numerous empty beer bottles at the bottom of the boat. Eyewitnesses reported that Oscar was driving recklessly, screaming and laughing, while the boat sped down the river. After the accident, Oscar insisted he hadn't been drinking, but police tests revealed he was under the influence of alcohol. Additionally, it was revealed that Oscar had a long-standing problem with alcohol addiction. On March 3, 2014, the trial for the murder of Riva began. On September 12, Oscar Pistorius was found guilty of manslaughter because the judge determined that he did not intend to kill his girlfriend. He was sentenced to 5 years in prison. This sentence was considered lenient, and with good behavior, Oscar could have been released early. Over the years, Oscar gained many enemies and became concerned for his safety. The most notable adversary was prosecutor Jerry Nell, nicknamed Bull Terrier. After reviewing the case, he remarked, "Oscar is talking nonsense," and began searching for inconsistencies in Oscar's story. Jerry Nell, a dedicated professional, recognized that he was dealing with a man who had taken another person's life and sought true justice. After several court appeals, Jerry Nell succeeded in having Oscar's lenient sentence overturned. 2 years later, Oscar was back in court, facing charges of premeditated murder. Before the hearing began, the prosecutor wanted to speak with Oscar privately while he was under house arrest. He reminded Oscar that his home was protected by a 3-meter fence topped with electrified wire, along with an expensive security system and numerous motion sensors. Given this, where did the idea of a robber come from? The autopsy results showed that Riva had food in her stomach that she had eaten at 1 a.m., suggesting that she and Oscar had not gone to bed that night. The prosecutor suspected that Oscar was feeling jealousy toward Riva. As she prepared to leave, he became enraged. When Riva locked herself in the bathroom out of fear, he began attacking. This raised several questions. Why did Oscar start attacking? Why didn't he call the police if he believed a robber was in the bathroom? And why did he continue to attack after the first shot, especially when he heard Riva's screams? Overwhelmed by the prosecutor's portrayal of that night, Oscar struggled to respond. Jerry Nell assured Oscar that they would address many unanswered questions in court. The trial eventually took place, resulting in the judge sentencing Oscar Pistorius to 6 years in prison, a sentence that was similar to the original one. Oscar's lawyers later filed an appeal, which led to an increase in his sentence to 13 years and 6 months. As of 2023, Oscar can apply for parole, but he is still serving time in prison. Despite his repeated requests to be transferred to a different facility due to his fear of potential violence from other inmates, these requests were never granted. This marked the end of Oscar Pistorius' sporting career and public admiration. He was once a national hero, but his actions not only took the lives of others but also ruined his own promising future. Lorraine Cox was a 32-year-old woman living in Exeter, UK. She is dating a man named Ellie who lives in Scotland. Although the distance between them is quite long, they have gotten used to it. At first, they only met on weekends and talked, but gradually their feelings for each other grew deeper. By 2020, they had been in contact in this way for 2 years. Despite the challenges of the distance, they decided to get engaged. Now, they are building a future together and preparing for their wedding. Lorraine is also planning to have their first child. However, in early 2020, their plans had to change for several reasons. By February, Lorraine had moved to Scotland to be with Ellie, where she obtained a temporary visa, and they spent considerable time together. When summer arrived, she wanted to return to Exeter to visit her family and friends for a month or two. This trip was not a breakup, she simply missed her loved ones. Afterward, she intended to return to Scotland and continue strengthening their relationship. Although restrictions in the UK remained strict, they were gradually relaxing, allowing public events to resume and many establishments to reopen. People eagerly took to the streets to socialize again, and Lorraine was no exception. On September 1, 2020, she arrived at her father's house in Exeter, excited to reconnect with friends. They spent the evening visiting several bars, enjoying drinks and good company, until they realized it was time to go home. Everyone left in a good mood. On September 2nd, Lorraine posted an unusual message on social media, claiming she was going to leave the country. This surprised everyone, as her only previous move had been to Scotland, and she had no plans to relocate again. She had just arrived to visit her father and intended to stay for at least a month. This sudden change in her mood and plans seemed out of character. In her post, Lorraine mentioned wanting to move about 50 kilometers from her father's house to a place called Plymouth, which she described as the first stop on her planned journey. This behavior was shocking because Lorraine was not known for making impulsive decisions, especially on such a significant scale. She had a stable life and a loving relationship in Scotland and had never mentioned wanting to move elsewhere. Now, she was considering a move toward France. Unsurprisingly, this post had a deep impact on Ellie. They had a strong relationship, making his fear of losing her understandable. Lorraine's friends bombarded her with questions. Initially, she responded willingly, but as the conversation progressed, her tone changed and mistrust grew. Those who knew her well noticed shifts in her writing style. She began using unfamiliar emojis, making odd mistakes, and her messages conveyed a sense of hostility. This worried her loved ones, as she had always maintained positive relationships with them, and there was no reason for her to display such aggression or undergo drastic life changes. Her father, Tony, who was hosting her during this time, even showed a family friend her old messages alongside the new ones. He pointed out clear inconsistencies in her writing style. Even those who didn't know her well noticed something was off. Throughout this time, Lorraine's boyfriend, who was named Ellie, was especially concerned and tried to understand her behavior. Initially, she responded to him with short, cold replies, but eventually, her answers became even more abrupt. The conversation ended when Lorraine sent him an emoji of a middle finger. This intensified the suspicion that someone else was using her account. Ellie had known Lorraine for 2 years, so the idea that the trip was related to a breakup or conflict seemed unlikely. They valued each other, which made her odd responses even more perplexing. Unfortunately, because of the distance, her boyfriend felt helpless and unable to intervene. A situation arose concerning Tony, Lorraine's father. Determined to discover the truth, he faced a challenge because he was away at the time and couldn't check his daughter's room for clues. Instead, he began speaking to Lorraine's friends, particularly those who had been with her the day before her sudden move to Plymouth. He was scheduled to return home the next day. Upon arriving home, Tony's first action was to go to Lorraine's room, where his suspicions grew stronger. He had already spoken with her close friends, and they all confirmed that no one had seen Lorraine since their breakup at the bar when everyone had left for the night. Inside Lorraine's room, it appeared as though she had never returned after her outing with friends. Her belongings from Scotland remained untouched, and nothing was missing from her room. It looked as if she had left for an extended trip without taking any of her things, which seemed impossible. The most alarming discovery was the bag she had left behind. Lorraine had diabetes and always carried a first aid kit to monitor her blood sugar levels. Her health depended on these supplies, and she never went anywhere, even for a quick trip to the store, without them. For outings like the one to the bar, she typically used a smaller bag. The fact that her larger kit was still in her room raised serious concerns about her recent plans. Tony realized that his daughter had not returned from the party, leading him to fear that something might have happened to her health. The messages she had exchanged with friends and relatives also seemed troubling. Worried, Tony sent another message to Lorraine on social media, expressing concern for her health and asking if she was okay. He warned her that if she did not respond, he would have to contact the police. The message was seen, but he received no reply. After that, Tony's and Lorraine's friends could no longer tolerate the uncertainty and began their search. They started by looking for clues in the bar where they had spent the evening on September 2nd. They interviewed witnesses, distributed flyers, and retraced the presumed route Lorraine would have taken home. It was clear that something alarming must have happened during her journey since she never came home again. Law enforcement and journalists quickly became involved. They were skeptical of the theory that Lorraine might have suffered a health crisis. Detectives believed that if that were the case, she would not have been able to send messages to her friends. Furthermore, several days had passed since her disappearance, and she would likely have been found in a hospital, but tests of recent admissions yielded no results. It appeared far more likely that Lorraine had encountered danger from someone. Journalists rushed to report on the situation, highlighting concerns over Lorraine's disappearance. They recalled that in May 2018, 2 years before Lorraine vanished, an attacker named Robert Proud had attacked a woman who strikingly resembled her. He had abused her but did not kill her, and then evaded capture for a long time. Given his criminal history, it raised fears that there could be more victims. Although he had completed his prison sentence, investigators began considering Lorraine as a potential victim. At the time of her disappearance, Robert was living near the path Lorraine would have taken home. This connection led to his arrest, and police sought to extract a confession from him. They believed he had kidnapped, abused, and possibly killed her, and that he might have disposed of her body. It was suspected that he took her phone and pretended to communicate with her friends and family to buy himself time and create confusion. There was another theory regarding Lorraine's disappearance. Some believed that Robert might have attacked her, but instead of dying, she was hiding to avoid becoming his victim again. The detectives prioritized finding Lorraine because she was clearly in danger. Robert might have been holding her hostage. The situation could have escalated, posing a significant threat. To test this theory, they began reviewing surveillance footage from cameras along Lorraine's potential route that night. Even after narrowing down the time frame, they had about 11,000 hours of footage from over 400 cameras across 120 different locations. Analyzing this footage was time-consuming, but it proved worthwhile, yielding the first clues needed to catch the criminal. Eventually, they spotted a girl who matched Lorraine's description in the recordings. After leaving her friends at the bar, she headed toward her father's house without making any turns. She almost made it home, but a few blocks away, something caught her attention: a kebab shop on the ground floor of an apartment building, which was open at night. Lorraine went inside, likely to grab a snack, and then left to eat on a bench before continuing her way home. Around 2:45 a.m., she returned to the kebab shop, but this time accompanied by an unfamiliar man. This raised alarms because he didn't appear to be just a random passerby. The footage suggested they had interacted, and he had managed to get her attention. The police continued to investigate the recordings and noted that the young man had been following Lorraine after they left the shop. This behavior was concerning, especially since she seemed to be walking voluntarily and the street was deserted. Detectives suspected the man might be a predator who targeted his victim, potentially involved in Lorraine's disappearance and the messages she had sent to her loved ones after the incident. He maintained a distance while following her, trying to remain inconspicuous, and seemed to be assessing the situation. It looked as though he was stalking her, especially since she appeared intoxicated and was stumbling. She had a valuable phone, and with no one accompanying her that night, he saw an opportunity to attack. The police attempted to locate another recording to determine how Lorraine left the building from at least one camera, but were unsuccessful. It appeared she had not exited at all. They spent considerable time reviewing the video footage, only to confirm that Lorraine had not left since she was last seen. The detectives concluded that she might still be inside, possibly being held against her will. Unfortunately, by the time they gathered this information, 8 days had passed. Given this long duration, only a miracle could save Lorraine, who suffered from diabetes. Nevertheless, her family held on to hope. The police obtained a clear photo of the man who accompanied and followed Lorraine that night. They printed it out and began distributing it through the media to attract witnesses. Initially, they visited the kebab shop and spoke with the owner. He informed them that he lived above the shop but had rented the apartment below to a young man about a month ago. This young man had moved in unofficially and was very withdrawn, to the extent that the owner didn't know much about him. The owner even expressed doubts about the young man's name. When police officers visited the apartment, they anticipated finding a crime scene. However, everything was surprisingly neat and clean. The young man living there identified himself as Christopher Mayer and showed them his identification. There was no sign of Lorraine in the apartment, and he allowed the detectives inside without any resistance. They inspected the place thoroughly to ensure that no one was being held against their will. Christopher was then shown a photo of Lorraine, along with a CCTV image in which a man resembling him was seen accompanying her to the house. He strongly denied any connection, claiming that he did not know her. However, the clear photograph made the police skeptical, as the similarities were unmistakable. A brief verbal confrontation ensued, with Christopher maintaining his stance. During this exchange, he insisted that he would never bring a strange woman to his apartment. The police then became interested in Christopher's mobile phone, which they seized for examination. They discovered that it contained Lorraine's SIM card, although the card was currently missing. This evidence confirmed that he had at least seen her recently. Further investigation revealed that a suspicious post had been made on Lorraine's social media account using this mobile phone. It appeared that Christopher had sent strange messages to her loved ones. After the unsettling incident, whatever it was, he had taken Lorraine's phone. Rather than using it for communication, he inserted a SIM card into his own phone to access her contact list and social media account. This raised further suspicions about Christopher. He was the last person confirmed to have seen Lorraine alive, and his attempts to manipulate her account seemed suspicious. It became clear that he was trying to cover his tracks, raising questions about his motives that the authorities still needed to uncover. Christopher was arrested and charged with the kidnapping of Lorraine Cox. That same day, forensic experts arrived at his apartment to investigate. They used a substance called luminol to carefully examine the area. While they found several suspicious traces of evidence, the most alarming findings were in a nearby alley. During their search of the apartment, they discovered blood and numerous signs that supported the theory that Lorraine was dead, particularly around a garbage can. The forensic team speculated that Christopher might have disposed of evidence by throwing away the body. They searched the alley and found a large plastic bag inside one of the trash containers that contained human remains. However, it was not a complete body. Some parts, including the torso and head, were missing, making identification difficult. Consequently, the case shifted from a missing persons investigation to a murder investigation, and the work continued. Detectives learned that on the night of Lorraine's disappearance, in addition to Christopher, 5 other young men were present. However, none appeared on the CCTV footage with Lorraine. These men likely entered the apartment to buy food or for other reasons, but their involvement needed further investigation. They could have unwittingly been present during the crime or could have assisted in covering up evidence. Notably, the group behaved very differently. Except for Christopher, everyone was cooperative and willing to provide information. Upon further investigation, the 5 other young men were found to be locals who lived nearby. Since there was no evidence against them, they were released. In stark contrast, Christopher was uncooperative, reluctant to talk, and often gave vague or confusing answers. He seemed to believe that the police lacked sufficient evidence against him, but they soon discovered that his real name was Azam Mangori. This revelation marked a turning point in the investigation, as detectives confronted him with the truth, signaling the beginning of the unraveling of his story. Azam claims that he changed his name because he was born in the Kurdistan region of Iraq, where people who do not follow tradition can face severe punishment, including being stoned to death. As an adult, he left his conservative homeland but still lives in fear of being hunted down and killed. To avoid this dangerous situation, he began calling himself Christopher. He had been living illegally in the UK since December 2018 to avoid returning to Iraq. Azam also possessed a high-quality fake ID under the name Christopher Mayer to evade detection by immigration authorities. This explains why the landlord knew almost nothing about the man. He was very cautious, had not attended school or worked anywhere, and lived off odd jobs. However, the interrogation ended abruptly. After admitting to these things, he refused to talk about Lorraine. His previous admissions were not significant to the police. DNA testing confirmed that the remains found in a trash bin were those of Lorraine. In Azam's apartment, DNA traces and other evidence indicated that Lorraine had been killed there because Azam had failed to clean thoroughly. The police also discovered a large handsaw and replacement blades purchased after the crime. Other items found included a driver's license, a debit card, and a wallet, all mutilated. Nearby trash bins contained bloody clothing, Lorraine's phone, and a SIM card discarded in the sewer. Unfortunately, parts of her body were never recovered. Detectives analyzed the location data from Azam's mobile phone on the day of Lorraine's murder and the subsequent days when he disposed of evidence. This investigation led them to a location on the city's outskirts known as Tin Pit Hill. During the search, they found Lorraine's torso and head, which were not well concealed. Investigators noted unsettling details. A piece of clothing was stuffed into her mouth, and a patch of skin was missing from her back, possibly taken as a trophy by the perpetrator. Unfortunately, no other body parts were located, and the remains were in an advanced state of decomposition, complicating the determination of the cause of death. The forensic expert concluded that Lorraine had likely been strangled. Despite strong evidence of his guilt, Azam continued to deny his involvement and created false stories. He even attempted to involve banned organizations in the case. The trial commenced in spring 2021. Although he never confessed, Azam and his defense team significantly altered his narrative. He now claimed to have a normal orientation and stated that he encountered Lorraine when she came to his place late at night after a bar visit. He approached her on the street and convinced her to come to his apartment for some intimacy. Azam maintained that Lorraine voluntarily came to his apartment after drinking heavily and using illegal substances. He claimed that after trying those substances himself, he experienced severe distortion of perception and lost consciousness. When he regained awareness, he found Lorraine in the bathroom, unresponsive. He alleged that he saw a puddle of urine beneath her and believed she had overdosed. Azam attempted to perform CPR, but it was unsuccessful. In a panic and without knowing the emergency number, he sat on the bathroom floor next to her body. Hallucinations then began, and he claimed to see dark creatures emerging from her mouth, prompting him to shove a piece of his t-shirt into her mouth to stop it. He pushed the cloth in so far that it could have caused her to choke. Despite being in a state of panic, he managed to find and send a video he had recorded around the same time to a friend, where he appeared calm and even exhaled smoke into the camera. He explained that he filmed the video to help himself calm down. His behavior grew increasingly bizarre. Instead of calling for help, he decided to dispose of the body and planned to flee from his relatives. Naturally, this account sounded implausible, leaving him with no solid defense. According to Azam, he was unsure what he would do after Lorraine died and kept her body in his apartment until he decided to dispose of it. When his anxiety reached its peak, he chose to throw it away. He called a taxi to take the bag with the remains to a wooded area on the outskirts of Exeter. Prosecutors noted that he seemed to be obsessed with amputation, as evidenced by the precise cuts he made, which horrified forensic experts. It was clear he had researched this topic extensively and was well prepared. That evening, Azam tried to connect with people on an escort website, seeking companionship but was unsuccessful. Later, he saw Lorraine on the street eating alone and viewed her as an ideal target. It seems that Azam may have premeditated this murder to fulfill his dark fantasies. Even with substantial evidence against him, his trial lasted 5 weeks. Ultimately, the jury found him guilty of murder and attempting to obstruct justice. He received a life sentence but is eligible for parole after 20 years, which means he could be released at the age of 44. Lorraine's boyfriend, Ellie, experienced profound grief, stating that a part of him died with her. He lives daily with this pain and struggles against despair. Lorraine's father, Tony, organized a charity march to rally support for his daughter. Participants silently walked the route she would have taken from the bar to her home, a journey she never completed. In the aftermath, Tony became an activist advocating for more CCTV cameras on UK streets to help prevent and solve violent crimes. He also started to make regular donations to an anti-abuse organization based in the UK. Even after justice was served, Lorraine Cox's family remained uncertain about how Azam was able to lure her into his apartment. Security footage showed her following him willingly. Azam claimed that he engaged her in conversation and offered her alcohol and a banned substance, which she accepted. However, toxicology reports found no traces of banned substances in her system, and a forensic expert stated that she did not die from diabetes, suggesting that Azam's account might be false. Sadly, the truth about what happened in his apartment may never be revealed, as only Azam and Lorraine know what truly occurred. Some believe Azam exploited Lorraine's kindness by asking for help, and that she may have felt unable to refuse, ultimately leading her into a dangerous situation. Tiffany James was born on August 18, 1980, in Tampa, Florida. She was the only child of Rosalind James and Turner Humphrey. Her parents were never married and separated soon after her birth. Her father moved away, started a new family, and showed little interest in her. Years later, as an adult, Tiffany decided to locate her father. They spoke, and she assured him that she held no grudges and wanted to keep in touch. This reunion allowed Tiffany to meet her half-siblings and their families, leading to the development of strong, positive relationships. Meanwhile, Rosalind focused on her own life and left Tiffany with her grandparents. Although Tiffany had both biological parents, she was primarily raised by her grandparents. Her mother Rosalind visited occasionally but did not play an active role in her upbringing. It was her aunts, Barbara and Vicky, along with her grandmother Beulah, who took on the parenting responsibilities. They ensured Tiffany attended preschool and school, celebrated her achievements, and supported her in every way. She was an outstanding student with a passion for literature and a creative spirit. She dreamed of opening her own beauty salon and becoming the best in her city. Tiffany was a sociable, popular, and stylish person. She often attracted attention with her looks and confidence, making her appealing to young men. While in high school, she started dating a boy named Derek Andrews, who was a year older. They both believed their love would last forever. In her senior year, Tiffany became pregnant and gave birth to their first child, a son named Derek, on July 26, 1998. This changed her plans for college, as she dedicated herself to motherhood. Derek took on various odd jobs to support his family, while Tiffany's family helped them as much as they could. In August 2002, 4-year-old Derek became a big brother when his parents welcomed another son, Darian, named after his paternal grandfather. At this point, Tiffany and Derek were living together in a small rented apartment. Although money was tight, they remained hopeful for their future and dreamed of creating a stable life together. A couple of years later, however, their romantic feelings faded, and they decided to separate amicably. The sons stayed with Tiffany while Derek supported them and made an effort to spend time with his children. He eventually began a new relationship but remained committed to being an involved father to Darian and Derek. As a single mother with 2 young sons, Tiffany started to seriously consider her future. She wanted a career that would allow her to provide for her family independently. Since she had not pursued further education after high school, she was eager to change that. Tiffany enrolled in a medical college, aiming to become a cosmetic specialist. Her ultimate goal was to open her own practice or even a clinic where she could turn her passion into a successful business. To manage her finances better, she moved back in with her grandparents, as paying for both tuition and rent was too much of a burden. Her family helped care for her sons whenever she was at work or in class. After finishing her education, she got a job at a private clinic as an assistant to a well-known doctor. She had a steady income and began advancing in her career. For a while, it appeared that everything was finally coming together for her. However, she found herself lacking a strong, supportive partner to lean on during difficult times. In early 2007, Tiffany met a man named Daryl Williams. He was 14 years older than she was and had 3 grown children from a previous marriage. Despite their age difference, this did not hinder their romantic relationship. She believed that he was a mature and trustworthy man, genuinely prepared for a serious commitment. Their relationship developed quickly, and soon, Tiffany, at 27, found herself pregnant. This news shocked both of them, but they were excited, and Daryl proposed to Tiffany, who happily accepted. However, during the routine checkup, she learned she was expecting twins. In March 2008, she welcomed twin girls, whom she named Diamond and Danielle. This happy event has brought joy to her life, and she has devoted all her love to her family, cherishing every moment spent together. Tiffany enjoyed taking her children to different events, discovering new activities, and creating lasting memories. She also loved dressing her daughters in matching outfits that gave them a fashionable appearance. Her older sons participated in sports like baseball, track, and swimming, while her twins, Diamond and Dania, began dance classes and rhythmic gymnastics at an early age. As the years went by, the children grew, but Tiffany and Daryl never married. Gradually, their relationship began to deteriorate as they found it increasingly difficult to communicate. Tiffany eventually realized that Daryl was not the person she had thought he was. Their relationship ended when she discovered his infidelity. Without any hesitation, she gathered her children and departed. After separating from Daryl, Tiffany relocated with her family to the quiet town of Brandon, Florida. This community was known for its strong infrastructure, low crime rates, and affordable housing, making it an ideal place to raise a family and start over. Eager to create a stable future, Tiffany completed a hairstyling program and landed a job at one of the top salons in town. She quickly built a loyal clientele and gained a reputation for her talent and creativity. Aspiring to open her own salon one day, she began looking for potential rental locations. Her skills, ambition, and rising reputation established her as one of the most in-demand stylists in the area, paving the way for a bright career ahead. As a single mother of 4, she moved into a spacious rental apartment in a newly built residential complex situated in one of the town's finest neighborhoods. Nearby amenities included a school, a dance studio, and a large sports center, everything she needed for a comfortable and fulfilling life for her family. By 2012, her sons had become more independent and often helped care for their younger sisters. Around this time, Tiffany decided to reconnect with her father and half-siblings. She traveled to Alabama to find them, and their family bonds were restored. They began to stay in touch, visit each other for holidays, and their children quickly grew close. Life was falling into place. Her finances were stable, and she was surrounded by loved ones. Although she felt secure about her future, Tiffany, a young, ambitious, and attractive woman, yearned for romance. She still believed in love and hoped to find a man who would love her and embrace her family, a man with whom she could build a strong and happy home. In 2014, Tiffany started her own small business, which began to thrive. That same year, at 34 years old, she reconnected with Ben, a man she had known in her youth but hadn't seen in nearly 15 years. Their unexpected encounter at a shopping mall marked the start of something special. Initially, they kept their relationship private. Ben was also a single parent who had recently settled in Brandon with his 2 young children. They began as friends, sharing coffee and meaningful conversations. When Ben finally confessed his feelings for Tiffany, she felt like the happiest woman in the world and admitted she felt the same way. Their relationship grew deeper and both families supported it. Tiffany was ecstatic, savoring this newfound happiness without rushing. She kept their romance discreet, sharing details only with her closest friends and family and refraining from posting pictures of them together on social media. Gradually, she prepared for a significant change as they decided to move in together and create a home as one family. On October 1, 2015, Tiffany posted a romantic and mysterious message on her personal social media account. The post featured a photo of 2 hands clasped together, one male and one female, both adorned with wedding bands, set against the backdrop of a Bible. The caption simply read, "Yes." This suggested that she was engaged, but she chose to keep her fiancé's identity a secret for the time being. Tiffany and her family always put a lot of effort into celebrating Halloween. They planned their costumes ahead of time, carved pumpkins into glowing lanterns, and went out to collect candy from their neighbors. By this time, Darian and Derek were old enough to enjoy the holiday with their friends, while the younger twins, Diamond and Denia, still loved going trick-or-treating with their mom. Since they lived in a large apartment complex, going door to door wasn't this thrilling. Instead, they visited a nearby neighborhood filled with single-family homes, where Halloween decorations created a festive atmosphere. Families in costumes moved from house to house, and generous homeowners made sure to have plenty of candy, so no one went home empty-handed. That night was supposed to be fun and relaxing, but no one could have predicted the tragedy that was about to unfold. A local woman was home alone, preparing to watch a horror movie to get into the Halloween spirit. The streets outside were quiet, most families had already gone home, and she didn't expect any more trick-or-treaters. Around 9 p.m., she was dozing on the couch with the TV still on when suddenly there was a loud noise, like an explosion, that woke her up. At that moment, her front door, which she had forgotten to lock, swung open. Startled, she quickly got up to shut it. What she saw on her doorstep left her frozen. A figure dressed entirely in black, wearing a hockey mask like the ones from the Friday the 13th movies, stood there. Instead of a machete, the person was holding a shotgun. For a split second, it felt like a scene from a movie or an elaborate Halloween joke. In shock and unsure of her next move, she glanced down and saw a woman lying at the figure's feet, writhing in pain and struggling to move. The masked figure looked down at her for a moment before raising the weapon again. Terrified, the woman ran for her life. She slammed the door just as 2 more deafening gunshots rang out. Collapsing onto the floor, she covered her head with her hands, fearing she might be next. Then, silence. The stillness was broken by a faint tapping on the window. At first, she ignored it, too frightened to move. But when the tapping came again, she cautiously approached the window and, against her better judgment, looked outside. There stood a young girl, tears streaming down her face. Without thinking of her own safety, the woman rushed to the door to help. Outside, she noticed another young girl sitting on the ground, shocked, hugging her knees. Without hesitation, she brought both girls inside, locked the door, and grabbed her phone to call for emergency services. By that time, other neighbors had heard the chaos and called the authorities. When first responders arrived, they discovered a woman lying in a pool of blood on the pavement. Despite her critical injuries, she was still alive. Paramedics did everything they could, but unfortunately, on the way to the hospital, she died from her wounds. The victim had no identification, and the 2 young girls were too traumatized to speak. However, as more neighbors gathered, they quickly recognized the woman, Tiffany, who is the owner of a local hair salon, along with her twin daughters, Diamond and Denia. Authorities immediately contacted Tiffany's relatives, while Diamond and Denia were taken to the hospital for evaluation. Fortunately, neither child had suffered any physical injuries, but they were deeply traumatized. Mental health professionals were brought in to help them process the event. Many people had been out celebrating that night, and several witnesses recalled the horrifying scene. However, piecing together the full story was challenging, as many struggled to believe what they had seen. It all felt too surreal, almost like a staged performance. Meanwhile, the masked attacker slipped into the crowd of costumed revelers and disappeared without a trace. Neighbors reported seeing a silver Chevrolet sedan parked near the house shortly before the incident. Witnesses noted that the car sped off after the first loud noise but stopped a short distance away moments later. It was uncertain whether the driver fled in a panic or had a connection to the attack. Unfortunately, no one saw the license plate, and no one could identify the driver's gender. Adding to the difficulty, there were no security cameras in the area to capture the incident. Witnesses could not provide even a basic description of the suspect, who was fully covered in a costume, hood, hockey mask, and gloves. They only agreed that the attacker was slightly taller than average and had a muscular build. At the crime scene, Tiffany's handbag was found on the ground, with its strap torn and its contents strewn about. Initially, investigators considered the possibility of a robbery gone wrong, but this theory was quickly dismissed. The cash inside the purse was untouched, and Tiffany was still wearing several pieces of gold jewelry. Nothing had been stolen. Moreover, it seemed unlikely that such a violent act would occur over a simple mugging, especially with a shotgun involved. The aggression of the attack suggested that it was personal. But who would want to harm Tiffany, a cherished mother and respected community member? Investigators began by questioning her ex-partners and her current boyfriend. Tiffany had been separated from her former partners, Derek Andrews and Daryl Williams, for years, and any previous conflicts had long since dissipated. Her current partner, Ben, remained a mystery since Tiffany had kept their relationship private, revealing little to friends and family. Due to this secrecy, detectives felt it necessary to question him urgently. Officers arrived at Ben's house around 5 a.m. the next morning. Despite the early hour, all the lights in the house were on, and Ben was found sitting by the front door with a shotgun. The officers ordered him to drop the weapon and raise his hands, which he complied with, insisting he was not involved in the attack. He then pleaded with the officers to protect his children, explaining that he had learned about the crime just hours earlier and was fearful that the attacker might come after him next. He felt a strong need to protect his family. During the questioning, Ben shared that in the months prior to the incident, Tiffany had told him about someone she believed was stalking her. She suspected it might be her ex-fiancé, Daryl, who was also the father of her twin daughters, Diamond and Denia. Their separation had been difficult, and they were currently engaged in a custody battle over the girls. Ben confirmed his whereabouts on Halloween night with a strong alibi. He stated that he, Tiffany, and their children had gone trick-or-treating earlier that evening. Later, he took his children to visit relatives while Tiffany and the twins intended to return to their home briefly before staying the night at his place. However, she never showed up. Almost at midnight, Tiffany's oldest son called to deliver the devastating news. Once investigators verified Ben's alibi, they released him and allowed him to go home. The focus then shifted to Daryl. Was he involved in such a violent act? Detectives were skeptical. Could he really have committed something so horrific in front of his own daughters, leaving them with lifelong trauma? On November 1st, officers visited Daryl's last known address but found that he no longer lived there. Instead, they encountered his adult daughter, who informed them that her father had moved in with his new girlfriend 6 months ago. She was visibly shaken when she heard about Tiffany's tragic death and was clearly in shock. His daughter disclosed concerning information about his short temper and controlling behavior. He was known to be domineering and would become furious when things didn't go his way. Additionally, he had a strong interest in firearms and owned a shotgun. Daryl's daughter explained that her father's breakup with Tiffany had been very contentious. He harbored deep resentment over having to pay child support and had fought hard for full custody of their twins, even though he knew he had little chance of winning. However, she noted that if Tiffany were gone, he would have had a better chance of gaining custody of the girls. Her daughter described her father as ruthless and believed he was capable of committing a crime. After speaking with her, investigators went to Daryl's workplace, a large chemical plant. His supervisor spoke highly of him, describing him as a dedicated worker who could handle the workload of 2 people and was always willing to take on extra shifts. However, Daryl's aggressive demeanor often led to conflicts with co-workers, sometimes resulting in physical confrontations. Notably, on the night of November 1st, Daryl, for the first time, refused a last-minute shift change, citing personal reasons. This unusual behavior raised further suspicions, as it left him without a confirmed alibi for the night of the crime. Detectives visited the home of Daryl's new girlfriend, Rosalind. They noticed a silver Chevrolet sedan in the driveway that matched the description of a car seen near the crime scene. When Rosalind answered the door and saw the officers, she appeared nervous. However, after learning the reason for their visit, she insisted that Daryl had stayed with her all night and had not left the house. Since there was no physical evidence to hold Daryl, the investigators decided to interview the main witnesses, Daryl and Tiffany's daughters, Diamond and Dunmire. They were still struggling to cope with the trauma. Dunmire was mostly silent, experienced nightmares, and couldn't sleep without the lights on. Diamond seemed to handle things better but would break down in tears whenever the conversation shifted to that tragic night. To help them, a skilled psychologist was brought in to gently support the sisters through their trauma, and over time, they began to share their experiences. They revealed that while staying with their father, they often saw a mysterious man delivering folders of papers to him. One day, when their father stepped out, they couldn't resist their curiosity and peeked inside the folders, discovering photos of their home, pictures of their mother in various locations around town, and even images of Ben's house. This leads them to realize that their father has employed a private investigator to follow their mother, Tiffany. Even more concerning was the fact that just 2 days before Tiffany's death, she had won full custody of the twins in court, requiring Daryl to pay child support, a situation he strongly opposed. With this new evidence, the police obtained a warrant for Daryl's arrest. Given his known history with firearms and the likelihood that he might resist, the officers decided it would be safer to arrest him at work, where security was tight, minimizing the risk of an armed confrontation. When the officers arrived, Daryl appeared shocked but did not resist arrest. He calmly allowed them to handcuff him and requested to speak with a lawyer. Initially, both he and Rosalind denied any involvement in the crime. However, investigators found phone records and GPS data showing they were both near the crime scene that night. Rosalind was the first to cooperate. In exchange for a lighter sentence, she agreed to testify against Daryl, stating that she had not known his exact intentions, she had merely driven him to the location and waited in the car. When she heard a loud noise, she panicked and drove off but slowed down to let Daryl jump in before fleeing. She claimed that she later provided him with an alibi out of fear for her own safety. Daryl faced charges of first-degree homicide, which could lead to the death penalty. In an attempt to escape this severe punishment, he tried to shift the blame. Upon learning that Rosalind had testified against him, he accused her of having an affair with his adult son and claimed that they had conspired to frame him. He was willing to implicate his own son in a serious crime to save himself. However, investigators quickly disproved his claims by thoroughly examining the evidence and confirming that his son had no involvement in the events of that night. With no alternatives available, Daryl eventually accepted a plea deal to avoid the death penalty. In April 2017, at the age of 49, he was found guilty and sentenced to 50 years in prison, with eligibility for parole after at least 25 years.